Hey guys! Tonight we embark on an exploration of the most controversial romantic liaisons in the annals of royalty. These relationships were so intense and volatile that they came close to dismantling vast empires. Imagine if I revealed that in 1936, a single telephone conversation between two paramours was mere hours away from obliterating the British Empire entirely. This hidden truth was so perilous that it even prompted Hitler to alter his strategies for invasion. And the astonishing aspect is that it all originated with a lady who harbored doubts about wedding the gentleman prepared to sacrifice all for her. This evening, we delve into the paramount royal controversy that stunned the globe. But before we immerse ourselves in this remarkable narrative, allow me to pose a question that will astonish you by the tale's conclusion. We often proclaim that love triumphs over everything, right? Yet, what occurs when affection truly overpowers too greatly? What transpires when desire grows so formidable that it risks dismantling a millennium of legacy? For that is precisely what unfolded when King Edward VIII encountered Wallis Simpson. And believe me, this romantic account bears no resemblance to the enchanted stories of your childhood. Before we plunge into this extraordinary account as a group, I would appreciate it if you could press that subscribe button and like this video, but only if you are sincerely appreciating our shared discovery. I am truly interested to learn, where are you tuning in from at this moment? Perhaps your bedroom or during a midnight journey. Leave a comment to share as I peruse each one and enjoy engaging with other enthusiasts of history. Now, lower the lights, settle in comfortably, and let us reveal the romantic saga that nearly toppled a monarchy spanning 1,000 years. Envision this scene. December 1936, in London. The British Empire spans across 1/4 of the planet. King Edward VIII occupies the throne, adored by his subjects. He is charismatic, contemporary, embodying all the qualities a monarch ought to possess. However, within the confines of the palace, a concealed fervor rages so fiercely that it is poised to shatter the essence of the crown. For Edward is not merely enamored. He is profoundly, urgently, utterly enthralled by a twice-divorced American named Wallis Simpson. You might wonder, what's the issue? Monarchs have kept mistresses throughout history. Yet, this is where the narrative turns utterly extraordinary. Edward refuses to maintain Wallis as a clandestine companion. He desires to wed her and elevate this American divorcee to the position of queen. In 1936, Britain, this is not merely shocking. It represents a constitutional catastrophe. But hold on. Before I recount how their liaison nearly incited a revolt, permit me to disclose a detail that will alter your perception of the whole affair. What if the conventional wisdom about their epic romance is entirely mistaken? Allow me to depict the origins of this entanglement. It is 1931, and Edward remains the Prince of Wales, the shining star of the royal lineage. He attends a gathering naturally. Such tales commence at social events, where he encounters Wallis Simpson. She is wedded to Ernest Simpson, a businessman of British-American heritage. Yet there is an allure about her that utterly enchants the prospective king. Wallis does not conform to the conventional ideals of beauty from the 1930s. She possesses angular, keen features, paired with a sharpness of intellect that slices keenly. However, she offers something absent from the refined English ladies in Edward's typical social sphere. She regards him as an individual, not as a future sovereign. She confronts him, debates with him, and even teases him. Edward, accustomed throughout his existence to affirmations of, "Yes, Your Highness," finds himself thoroughly enchanted. Their liaison commences discreetly. Covert rendezvous, encrypted correspondence, meticulously arranged meetings. Yet Edward is far from discreet regarding his fascination. He bestows upon Wallace gems capable of sustaining a modest nation. We speak of emeralds resembling the size of robin's eggs, diamonds formerly owned by Indian Maharajas. Whispers circulate in the press. Concerns arise within the government. But this is what renders the account so captivating and hazardous. Wallis Simpson is no innocent climber dazzled by regal favor. She is shrewd, driven, and fully aware of the stakes involved. In her confidential letters, uncovered by scholars many years afterward, she confides to her aunt about Edward. "I will endeavor to ensure his contentment, although I must admit I perceive him as rather uncomplicated in various respects." Uncomplicated. She referred to the prospective King of England as uncomplicated. And perhaps her assessment held truth, for Edward was on the verge of committing the most disastrously straightforward choice in the chronicles of British royalty. By 1935, their bond is the most poorly concealed secret among London's elite. Edward devotes more hours to Wallis's soirees than to formal regal obligations. He solicits her views on governmental issues. He even includes her in excursions intended as exclusive royal retreats. The Archbishop of Canterbury is appalled. The Prime Minister endures restless nights. Across the ocean, American periodicals revel in headlines such as "The King's American Sweetheart." Yet the British media remains utterly mute. A pact among gentlemen exists, a complete press embargo that appears inconceivable in our era of TMZ and Twitter. The British populace remains oblivious that their monarch is besotted with an American divorcee. They are unaware that their monarchy teeters on the brink of ruin due to amorous notes and nocturnal telephone exchanges. Then arrives 1936, and the landscape shifts dramatically. Edward's father, King George V, passes away, and abruptly, our amorous protagonist ascends as King Edward VIII. Now, the liaison transcends mere salacious chatter. It evolves into a constitutional predicament because Wallis Simpson has recently dissolved her second marriage and aspires to wed the King of England. But here is the inquiry that will linger in your thoughts, well beyond this narrative's close. Did Wallis Simpson genuinely desire to ascend as queen, or was she ensnared in a regal fixation she never sought? The dilemma: the Church of England, led by the king, rejects divorce. A divorced individual cannot assume the role of queen. This transcends mere custom. It encompasses ecclesiastical doctrine, constitutional principles, the core of the monarchy itself. Parliament clarifies: select the throne or the lady. Both are unattainable. And this is where Edward renders a verdict that resonates across the ages. On December 11, 1936, in a worldwide radio address, King Edward VIII addresses his subjects directly. "I have found it impossible to bear the weighty load of accountability and fulfill my obligations as king in the manner I desire without the assistance and backing of the woman I cherish. With these declarations, he emerges as the inaugural British sovereign to willingly relinquish the throne for affection for Wallis Simpson, for a lady who, in her intimate reflections, harbored uncertainties about marrying him. The repercussions are rapid and severe. Edward assumes the title of Duke of Windsor, effectively banished from Britain. His sibling George ascends as King George VI indeed, the monarch whose stammering challenges were depicted in the King's Speech. The royal kin largely severs ties with Edward. The lady for whom he forfeited all well, that narrative holds its own intricacies. What renders this account so enthralling extends beyond the romance. It is the sheer boldness of the endeavor. In an era where obligation reigned supreme, where the crown was deemed hallowed, one individual opted for love over dominion. Whether this renders him a romantic or an egoist is a judgment for you. Yet contemplate the gravity of that selection. Edward surrendered governance over 500 million souls, command of the globe's mightiest fleet, residence in edifices that sheltered kings for a millennium all, for a woman who privately labeled him as uncomplicated in her letters. The cascading impacts of this resolution have molded contemporary history in manners we continue to unearth. Had Edward retained the crown, would Britain have been equipped for World War II? Would the steadfast guidance of George and the motivational presence of the future Queen Elizabeth II have materialized? At times, the most intimate choices yield the most significant historical ramifications. And here is a revelation that will truly astonish you as we proceed with tonight's expedition. The saga of Edward and Wallis was merely the commencement. For regarding romantic entanglements that nearly demolished realms, they were in fact operating on a lesser scale. Up next, we venture back more than 2,000 years to encounter a lady who did not merely select between affection and authority. She harnessed love as the supreme instrument of conflict. Cleopatra's calculated allurements did not merely ensnare affections. They subdued the most formidable empire ever known. And the manner in which she maneuvered Julius Caesar and Mark Antony against one another, it constitutes a pinnacle of authority, fervor, and strategic acumen that renders contemporary courtship appear juvenile. If you believed Edward VIII's romantic tale was theatrical, prepare yourself, for we are about to meet the paramount sovereign of tactical enchantment. We are traveling back over 2,000 years to ancient Egypt, where a woman did not simply succumb to love with authority. She brandished love as her most lethal armament. Cleopatra VII did not merely captivate men. She overpowered the Roman Empire one soul at a time, and the fashion in which she orchestrated the planet's most influential figures is utterly astounding. But here is what will astonish you most regarding Cleopatra's narrative. Nearly all that Hollywood has imparted about her is utterly inaccurate. Prepared to have your perceptions shattered? Envision this. 48 BC, Alexandria, Egypt. The most renowned library of antiquity smolders afar. Internal strife ravages the domain of the pharaohs. Amid this turmoil, a 21-year-old queen is poised to enact the most daring enticement in the annals of humanity. Yet Cleopatra is not the alluring siren portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. She is far more formidable. She is ingenious. Here is the aspect most overlooked about Cleopatra. She was not Egyptian by descent. She was Greek, tracing her lineage to one of Alexander the Great's commanders. For 3 centuries, Her kin, the Ptolemies, governed Egypt while scarcely uttering the Egyptian tongue. But Cleopatra mastered 9 languages with fluency. 9. She was the inaugural Ptolemaic sovereign in 300 years to genuinely acquire Egyptian and bond with her populace. And in terms of appearance, ancient currency depicts her with a notable nose, a firm jaw, and what chroniclers delicately term ordinary attributes. But this is what rendered her irresistible: her voice. The ancient scholar Plutarch noted that her voice resembled a musical device with numerous strings. She could persuade anyone of anything merely through conversation. So when Julius Caesar, the most dominant figure globally, reaches Alexandria in 48 BC, Cleopatra recognizes she possesses one opportunity to preserve her realm. Her brother Ptolemy XIII has ousted her from authority, leaving her essentially a displaced queen devoid of forces, supporters, or prospects, except for her intellect. What ensues is legendary material, but here is the authentic account. Cleopatra arranges to be clandestinely introduced into Caesar's chambers, concealed within a rug. Now envision being Julius Caesar. You are 52 years of age. You have subdued Gaul. You have traversed the Rubicon. You coined the expression, "I came, I saw, I conquered." And abruptly, from the rug emerges this youthful queen, who commences conversing with you in impeccable Latin concerning philosophy, mathematics, and warfare tactics. Caesar is thoroughly mesmerized. But this is what is ingenious about Cleopatra's tactic. She does not allure Caesar with her attractiveness. She captivates him with her wisdom. She converses about Egyptian framework, Roman governance, commerce paths via the Red Sea. She demonstrates that Egypt is not merely a trophy to claim. It is a collaboration that could elevate Rome further. And it succeeds. Within days, Caesar supports Cleopatra against her sibling. Within months, they are paramours. Within a year, she bears his son, Caesarion. But here is the tactical brilliance of it all. Cleopatra does not merely become Caesar's paramour. She evolves into his counselor, his ally in re-envisioning the potential of an empire. Contemplate this briefly. Caesar had dominated half the familiar world, yet he had never encountered a woman capable of matching his intellectual aspirations. Cleopatra could deliberate battle strategies in the dawn and verse in the dusk. She could broker commerce pacts and then discourse philosophy beneath the constellations. For a man accustomed to being the most astute in any chamber, discovering an equivalent must have been exhilarating. Their bond scandalized Rome. Roman spouses were anticipated to be demure, reticent, centered on domestic affairs. Cleopatra arrived in Rome aboard a gilded vessel, hosting extravagant gatherings where she liquefied pearls in vinegar solely to flaunt her opulence, and overtly swayed Caesar's governmental choices. The Roman Senate was aghast. This alien queen was rendering their eminent commander appear feeble. But then, on the Ides of March in 44 BC, all alters. Caesar is slain, pierced 23 times upon the Senate floor. Cleopatra, residing in Rome, abruptly finds herself isolated in a metropolis that despises her. She retreats to Egypt, yet she comprehends that her kingdom's destiny now dangles precariously. Here is where Cleopatra's narrative becomes even more extraordinary. Most would have surrendered, secluded themselves in their residence, and hoped for fortune. Not Cleopatra. She promptly commences scheming her subsequent maneuver, for she recognizes something that will transform all. Rome's authority is poised to fragment among three figures: Octavian, Lepidus, and Mark Antony. And Cleopatra is about to direct her attention toward Mark Antony. Now, Mark Antony differs entirely from Julius Caesar. Whereas Caesar was cerebral and methodical, Antony is ardent and spontaneous. He is a fighter who relishes wine, festivities, and grandiose displays. He is also strikingly attractive, magnetic, and commands the allegiance of half the Roman forces. If Cleopatra can secure his favor, Egypt endures. If not, Egypt devolves into yet another Roman territory. So, in 41 BC, when Antony summons her to convene with him in Tarsus, Cleopatra does not merely appear. She orchestrates a display that remains discussed 2,000 years hence. Envision this. She arrives upon a gilded barge with violet sails, attired as Aphrodite, the deity of love. The atmosphere is dense with aromatic incense. Musicians perform as she is attended by youths clad as cupids. The whole populace of Tarsus lines the riverbanks to observe this drifting utopia draw near. But here is the ingenious element. While all are entranced by the spectacle, Cleopatra is observing Mark Antony, discerning what motivates him. And she ascertains that, unlike Caesar, driven by heritage and dominion, Antony is propelled by delight and acclaim. He yearns to feel divine among mortals. So that is precisely what Cleopatra provides him. She hosts feasts costing more than most witness in an existence. She arranges intricate role-playing scenarios where they don attire as deities. She renders him feel like the most splendid being ever to exist. And just as with Caesar, it functions flawlessly. But Cleopatra's bond with Antony transcends mere allure and extravagance. They become authentic collaborators in reimagining the Roman Empire's potential. Antony begins embracing Egyptian traditions, donning Egyptian garb, even producing currency bearing both their likenesses. They envision forging an empire that merges the finest of East and West, Greek thought with Egyptian insight, Roman proficiency with Oriental extravagance. Here is something that will astonish you. Cleopatra and Antony did not merely engage in a romance. They produced 3 offspring together and essentially crafted an alternate vision for the Mediterranean world's future. If their scheme had succeeded, our current world might differ profoundly. But while they are occupied with domesticity and imperial planning, Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, is stealthily amassing authority in Rome. He depicts Antony as a defector enchanted by alien sorcery. He sways Roman sentiment against this Egyptian sovereign who presumes to affect Roman affairs. The strain accumulates for years, until it culminates at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. This transcends a mere sea engagement. It is a confrontation between 2 divergent visions of Rome's destiny. On one flank, Octavian's conventional Roman principles. On the other, Antony and Cleopatra's international amalgamation of cultures. And here is where Cleopatra renders the choice that alters all. Amid the fray, perceiving their defeat, she commands her vessels to withdraw. Some scholars claim she retreated in fear. Others contend it was a tactical retreat to battle anew. But Antony, observing her fleet departing, pursues her. His armada, believing their leader has forsaken them, capitulates. The consequences are swift and merciless. Octavian chases them to Egypt. Antony, presuming Cleopatra deceased, impales himself upon his blade. Cleopatra, realizing defeat is inevitable, elects to perish on her terms. The renowned ass bite is likely myth. Most scholars believe she employed a toxic mixture, permitting a serene and graceful demise. But here is what renders Cleopatra's narrative so compelling. She nearly achieved it. Had Actium unfolded differently, had she and Antony prevailed, Western civilization's trajectory would have shifted. In lieu of the Roman Empire, we might have possessed an Egyptian-Roman synthesis that esteemed knowledge and culture alongside martial prowess. Contemplate what Cleopatra truly achieved. She preserved Egypt's autonomy for almost 2 decades via sheer charisma and strategic prowess. She persuaded 2 of history's most influential men to wholly re-envision their goals. She approached within one confrontation of remolding the ancient realm, and she accomplished this in an epoch when females wielded negligible political influence, when they were anticipated to remain mute and compliant. Cleopatra declined both. She commanded 9 languages, supported academics, financed scientific inquiries, and governed one of Earth's wealthiest domains. She did not merely employ love as an armament. She utilized it as an instrument of negotiation, coalition formation, and imperial establishment. What insights can we glean from Cleopatra's method to affection and authority? Perhaps that authentic allure transcends physical allure. It involves becoming so intriguing, so mentally invigorating, so exceptionally outstanding that influential individuals desire your presence. She rendered herself essential, not via deceit, but through capability. I am interested. What do you believe would have transpired had Cleopatra triumphed at Actium? Would our world be improved today if her concept of a multicultural dominion had prevailed? Share your reflections in the comments. But our expedition through royal liaisons that nearly obliterated kingdoms is merely commencing. For while Cleopatra employed tactical allure to safeguard her ancient dominion, centuries hence in France, another royal romantic scandal was fermenting. One that would contribute to igniting the most ferocious uprising in European annals. Marie Antoinette's prohibited romances did not merely astonish the Versailles court. They emerged as the catalyst that incinerated the whole French monarchy. And the manner in which rumors and murmurs about her romantic existence transformed a nation against its queen. It serves as a cautionary narrative about the influence of societal perception that resonates strikingly today. Speaking of romantic controversies that overthrew empires, allow me to narrate about a queen whose purported liaisons did not merely stun a nation. They literally aided in fueling the most sanguinary revolution in European chronicles. Marie Antoinette's romantic life became such a tool against the French monarchy that it converted an entire nation into avengers. But here is the revelation that will utterly astonish you. Most of the controversies that demolished her repute likely never occurred. What if I disclosed that fake news is not a contemporary creation? That in 1780s France, propaganda concerning a queen's romantic affairs was so potent it persuaded millions to endorse severing her head. Welcome to the account of how whispers evolved into revolt and how Marie Antoinette's alleged forbidden romances became the spark that ignited the French Revolution. It is 1770, and a 14-year-old Austrian princess arrives at the French court with one mission: to solidify the alliance between Austria and France by wedding the future King Louis XVI. Her name is Maria Antonia, but history will recognize her as Marie Antoinette. She is youthful, foreign, and poised to become France's most reviled woman without fully comprehending the cause. Here is what renders Marie Antoinette's narrative so poignant and intriguing. She entered a political snare established long prior to her arrival in France. The French populace already harbored resentment toward Austria. They distrusted external sway and were beginning to weary of a monarchy that appeared increasingly disconnected from their hardships. But Marie Antoinette is unaware of this. She is an adolescent yearning to assimilate, enjoy herself, and perhaps discover some joy in an orchestrated union with a youth who, frankly, is as stimulating as observing drying paint. Louis XVI is clumsy, fixated on locks and hunting, and so socially awkward that their marriage remains unconsummated for 7 years. 7 years. Imagine being a young lady confined in a passionless, physically unsatisfying marriage while the entire court observes and gossips about your every action. So, Marie Antoinette does what any isolated young individual might. She seeks companionship, thrill, and emotional bonds elsewhere. And this is where the whispers commence to escalate wildly. Her initial significant controversy involves the Swedish Count Axel von Fersen. Now, Fersen embodies everything Louis XVI lacks. He is tall, attractive, refined, and emotionally accessible. He becomes Marie Antoinette's most intimate confidant, and likely the affection of her existence. But here is what is captivating about their connection. We possess numerous letters from them, and although they are profoundly tender, there is no definitive proof they were ever physically close. But realities are irrelevant when confronting palace machinations and societal views. The French court begins murmuring. The gossip disseminates to Paris. And suddenly, Marie Antoinette is no longer merely an Austrian princess. She is l'Autrichienne, the Austrian who betrays France with overseas paramours. Then arrives the scandal that truly ignites everything, the affair of the diamond necklace in 1785. Now, this tale is so outlandish it resembles a melodrama script. A swindler named Jean de la Motte persuades a cardinal that Marie Antoinette wishes to covertly acquire a diamond necklace valued at 1.6 million livres that equates to about $15 million today. The cardinal, aspiring to gain the queen's approval, organizes the acquisition. The fraudster pilfers the necklace, escapes to England, and when the entire plot unravels, guess who bears the blame? Marie Antoinette had no involvement in this deception. She was unaware it was transpiring. But when the story emerges, the French public disregards facts. They perceive a foreign queen residing in opulence while they struggle to purchase bread, and they presume her culpability. The leaflets and ballads deriding her proliferate rapidly. She becomes the emblem of all that ails the monarchy. But here is where the narrative turns genuinely somber. As France's economic turmoil intensifies in the 1780s, the assaults on Marie Antoinette grow increasingly savage and erotic. Salacious pamphlets begin circulating, illustrating her in explicit sexual scenarios with everyone from Count Fersen to her female companions. These are not merely political assaults. They are reputational demolitions crafted to erode her legitimacy as a queen and as a female. The most injurious whispers imply she engages in affairs with numerous men and women, that she is depleting France's coffers to sustain her lovers' existences, that she even conspires with Austria to sabotage French concerns. None of these allegations possess substantial evidence, but they disseminate through Paris like an epidemic. Here is what is especially ruthless about this disinformation effort. Marie Antoinette's authentic character was nearly the antithesis of her depiction. Yes, she was lavish and occasionally insensitive to destitution, but she was also a committed mother who devoted hours to playing with her offspring, a benefactor of the arts who bolstered French heritage, and a woman who earnestly attempted to aid French philanthropies and initiatives. But perception solidified as truth. By the late 1780s, as France verged on insolvency and upheaval, Marie Antoinette had become the ideal culprit. Every fiscal issue, every governmental shortfall, every societal inequity could somehow be attributed to the foreign queen and her supposed ethical decay. When the French Revolution ultimately erupts in 1789, the attacks on Marie Antoinette escalate to fresh heights of ferocity. Revolutionary publications release daily accounts about her presumed liaisons, her alleged schemes against the revolution, her rumored efforts to summon foreign forces to suppress the insurgency. The reality that most of these narratives are utter fabrications is irrelevant. They fulfill their objective of swaying public sentiment against the monarchy. Here is something that will send shivers down your spine. In the months preceding her execution, Marie Antoinette was confined in a minuscule moist cell where she was monitored around the clock by guards selected specifically for their disdain toward the nobility. She was denied solitude for using the facilities. She could not change attire without observation. It was mental torment designed to shatter her resolve before her demise. And yet, even confronting death, Marie Antoinette preserved her poise. On October 16, 1793, as she was escorted to the guillotine, she inadvertently trod upon her executioner's foot and expressed regret. Contemplate that. Confronting execution, she retained the elegance to apologize for a trivial mishap. But here is the inquiry that ought to unsettle us. How much of Marie Antoinette's downfall stemmed genuinely from her deeds? And how much arose from a calculated propaganda drive that exploited sexual scandal to annihilate a political adversary? The similarities to contemporary politics are profoundly unsettling. We exist in an era where whispers propagate instantaneously via social platforms, where fabricated news can demolish reputations in a night, where sexual controversy remains wielded as a tool against political personas. Marie Antoinette's narrative is a warning about the peril when societal opinion is manipulated by those with political motives. What is especially tragic is that by the time Marie Antoinette was beheaded, France was already plunging into the reign of terror. The revolution intended to deliver liberty and parity was consuming its own progeny. Thousands were executed on tenuous accusations. The very individuals who celebrated Marie Antoinette's demise would soon confront the identical guillotine. Was Marie Antoinette flawless? Certainly not. She was advantaged, at times oblivious, and undoubtedly committed political errors. But did she merit death for purported liaisons that likely never transpired? Did whispers about her romantic life warrant the annihilation of an entire monarchy? These are inquiries worth contemplating as we observe contemporary political controversies unfold. How readily can we be swayed by narratives about public figures' private existences? How frequently do we permit personal tittle-tattle to eclipse more vital political matters? Contemplate how altered history might have been had Marie Antoinette been evaluated on her actual deeds rather than malicious whispers. Perhaps the French Revolution would have followed a divergent course. Perhaps thousands of lives might have been preserved. Perhaps we would have learned to distinguish personal scandal from political administration centuries sooner than we did. I would love to hear your opinion. Do you consider personal scandals should influence how we assess political leaders, or should we concentrate solely on their strategies and deeds? Share your reflections below. The obliteration of Marie Antoinette through scandal and rumor was catastrophic, but it was not the initial instance a royal romantic life incited massive political turmoil. In fact, if we travel back a few centuries to England, we will uncover a king whose amorous fixations did not merely endanger one monarchy. They literally redrew Europe's religious landscape. Henry VIII's lethal courtship game renders Marie Antoinette's tribulations appear as a trivial controversy. We are discussing a man who established a wholly new church merely to divorce his spouse, who executed 2 queens for alleged infidelity, and whose 6 marriages sparked religious conflicts enduring centuries. The casualties from Henry's romantic life are utterly staggering. When it comes to royal romantic scandals that reconfigured entire societies, no one, and I emphasize no one, approaches Henry VIII of England. This is the individual who literally fractured Christianity in twain due to his desire for a divorce, who founded his own church to remarry, who beheaded 2 of his 6 wives for supposed adultery. Henry's romantic existence was so disastrous, it incited religious wars persisting for centuries and yielded a casualty count that is absolutely astonishing. But here is what will shock you about Henry VIII. He commenced as one of Europe's most desirable bachelors, a Renaissance prince who composed love verses and was regarded as the prize of his era. So, how did this charming youthful king transform into history's most lethal spouse? And why did his frantic quest for true affection culminate in demolishing more lives than most conflicts? Let us commence at the outset, because Henry's evolution from enchanting prince to wife-slaying despot is one of the most disturbing character developments in royal annals. When Henry ascends the throne in 1509, he is 17 years old, 6 feet tall in an age when most males scarcely reach 5.5 feet, athletic, astute, and strikingly handsome. He commands 4 languages, creates music, pens poetry, and is essentially the quintessential Renaissance figure. European princesses are literally competing for the chance to wed him. But there is one complication. Henry is already wedded to Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, in a union arranged for political purposes when he was merely 11 years old. Now, Catherine is truly ideal queen material. She is wise, pious, politically astute, and truly cherishes Henry. But she possesses one fatal defect in Henry's view. After 6 pregnancies, she has provided him only one surviving offspring, a daughter named Mary. And here is where Henry's fixation begins to devour him. In the 16th century, kings require male successors. Without a son, Henry believes England will descend into civil strife following his demise. He is likely correct. England has scarcely recuperated from the Wars of the Roses, where various royal branches massacred one another for 30 years over inheritance disputes. So, Henry commences convincing himself that God is penalizing him for wedding his brother's widow, even though he required a special papal exemption to do so initially. He becomes obsessed with discovering an escape from his marriage, and that is when he meets Anne Boleyn. Now, Anne Boleyn differs from the typical royal paramour. She is not especially beautiful by Tudor criteria. She has dark hair in an era favoring blondes, a prominent mole on her neck, and what her adversaries describe as a long neck resembling a crane. But Anne possesses something that drives Henry utterly mad. She declines to share his bed. Contemplate this. Henry is England's most powerful man. He is accustomed to obtaining whatever he desires instantly, and this young lady simply refuses. Not only does she refuse, she insists that if he desires her, he must wed her. She aspires to be queen or nothing at all. This establishes a psychological interplay that is utterly fascinating. Henry, who has never been denied anything, becomes wholly obsessed with the one woman he cannot possess. He composes 17 love letters to her that endure today. Listen to this excerpt. I beseech you to inform me explicitly of your entire mind regarding the love between us two. This is the King of England, essentially pleading for attention from a woman who is playing hard to get. But Anne's demand for marriage creates an impossible problem. Henry cannot divorce Catherine because the Pope will not permit it. The Catholic Church does not recognize divorce, and Catherine is the aunt of Charles I, the Holy Roman Emperor, who essentially serves as the Pope's military guardian. So the Pope is caught between theology and politics, and he chooses to delay. For 6 years, Henry wages a diplomatic battle, attempting to annul his marriage. He dispatches envoys to Rome. He bribes cardinals. He even threatens armed intervention. Nothing succeeds. And throughout this period, Anne Boleyn refuses to consummate their relationship, keeping Henry in a state of romantic and sexual frustration that is driving him literally insane. Finally, in 1533, Henry does something that changes the course of world history. He severs ties with Rome completely. He declares himself the supreme head of the Church of England, appoints his own Archbishop of Canterbury, and grants himself a divorce. Just like that, he has created the Anglican Church and shattered the unity of Western Christianity. The human cost of this decision is absolutely staggering. Henry executes anyone who opposes his break with Rome, including his former closest friend, Thomas More, who was one of Europe's most brilliant minds. We are talking about thousands of people who died because Henry wanted to remarry. But here's the twisted irony. Once Henry finally marries Anne Boleyn, the passion fades almost immediately. She becomes pregnant right away, but she gives birth to a daughter, the future Elizabeth Thales. Henry is furious. He wanted a son and has convinced himself that Anne somehow tricked him into this marriage. Anne's downfall is swift and brutal. When she miscarries a son in 1536, Henry decides she is cursed. Worse, he has already noticed his next target, Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. So Henry does what he is becoming famous for. he fabricates evidence that Anne has committed adultery with multiple men, including her own brother. The charges are almost certainly false. The timelines do not align. The witnesses are coerced, and the supposed confessions are obtained under torture. But Henry does not care about evidence. He wants Anne gone so he can marry Jane. And that is exactly what happens. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn is beheaded on Tower Green. Henry marries Jane Seymour 11 days later. Jane finally gives Henry what he desperately craves: a son, the future Edward VI. But she dies 12 days after giving birth, probably from postnatal complications. Henry is devastated. He genuinely loved Jane and will be buried next to her when he dies. But his grief does not halt his marriage spree. Wife number 4 is Anne of Cleves, selected from a portrait that turns out to be wildly flattering. When Henry meets her in person, he is so disgusted he calls her the Flanders mare and has the marriage annulled after 6 months. Poor Anne is probably relieved. She has gotten the best deal of any of Henry's wives by surviving with her head intact. Wife number 5, Catherine Howard, is barely 20 when she marries the now obese, diseased, and psychologically unstable Henry. She is young, flirty, and probably does not understand the deadly game she is playing. When evidence emerges that she had relationships before her marriage to Henry, and possibly an affair during it, Henry goes ballistic. Catherine Howard is executed in 1542, and this time Henry does not even attend the trial. By now, Henry's romantic obsessions have literally changed the DNA of European politics. England has broken with Rome, triggering religious wars that will last for centuries. Protestant and Catholic nations are choosing sides based partly on their relationship with Henry's marriages. The Counter-Reformation is partly a response to Henry's theological rebellion. And the personal cost: Henry has executed 2 wives, divorced 2 others, and been widowed once. Thousands of people have died in religious upheavals caused by his marital decisions. He has terrorized his own children. Mary barely survives being declared illegitimate. Elizabeth grows up knowing her father killed her mother. And Edward inherits a kingdom torn apart by religious conflict. Wife number 6, Catherine Parr, survives only because she is smart enough to be submissive, and because Henry dies before he can find another reason to start the divorce process again. By the end of his life, Henry is a paranoid, bloated tyrant who weighs over 300 pounds and has legs so ulcerated they can be smelled from across the room. But here is what is truly terrifying about Henry's story. It shows how quickly personal obsession can become political catastrophe when you have absolute power. Henry's desperate search for love and male heirs did not just destroy his wives. It fractured Christianity, triggered centuries of religious warfare, and set the stage for conflicts that would eventually reach the New World. Think about the butterfly effect of Henry's marriages. If he had been content with Catherine of Aragon, England might have remained Catholic. The Mayflower might never have sailed to America. The entire religious landscape of the Western world would be different. What do you think? Was Henry a romantic figure destroyed by circumstances, or was he always a monster waiting for the right opportunity to emerge? I am genuinely curious about your take on this. Henry's deadly dating game proves that when love and absolute power collide, the results can be absolutely catastrophic. But Henry's marital chaos was just one example of how personal obsessions can destroy kingdoms. In our next tale, we are traveling to Imperial Russia, where another royal's twisted relationship with a mysterious mystic did not just scandalize the court. It helped bring down an empire that had ruled for 3 centuries. The story of Rasputin and the Romanov family is so dark and bizarre that if you saw it in a movie, you would think it was too outrageous to be true. But every shocking detail actually happened. From Henry VIII's deadly marriages, we leap forward to Imperial Russia, where a love affair so twisted and bizarre unfolded that it reads like something from a horror novel, except every shocking detail actually happened. This is the story of Grigory Rasputin, a filthy peasant mystic who seduced his way into the heart of the Russian royal family and helped destroy a 300-year-old empire. But here is the part that will blow your mind. Rasputin's power did not come from black magic or supernatural abilities. It came from something far more dangerous and mundane. What if I told you that the downfall of the mighty Romanov dynasty was not caused by revolution or war, but by a mother's desperate love for her sick child? That one of history's most powerful empires collapsed because a peasant from Siberia convinced an empress he could save her son's life. The Rasputin scandal is proof that sometimes the most intimate family secrets become the deadliest political weapons. Let us set the scene. It is 1905, St. Petersburg, the glittering capital of Imperial Russia. Tsar Nicholas II rules over 1/6 of the world's land surface and 130 million subjects. His wife Alexandra is a German princess who converted to Russian Orthodoxy for love. They seem to have everything: wealth, power, 4 beautiful daughters. But there is one problem that is tearing their family apart. Their son and heir, Alexei, has hemophilia. Now, hemophilia in 1905 is essentially a death sentence. One small bump, one minor fall, and Alexei could bleed internally until he dies in agony. There is no treatment, no cure, no hope. Alexandra watches her precious boy suffer through bleeding episodes that can last for days, and she is slowly going insane with grief and desperation. Enter Grigory Rasputin, a self-proclaimed holy man from the backwoods of Siberia. Picture this. He is tall, gaunt, with wild hair and hypnotic blue eyes that seem to burn right through you. He smells terrible. His fingernails are black with dirt, and he has a reputation for drinking, fighting, and seducing women wherever he goes. He is basically everything the refined St. Petersburg court finds revolting. But Rasputin has one skill that makes him invaluable to the royal family. Somehow, inexplicably, he can stop Alexei's bleeding episodes. We still do not know how he did it. Maybe it was hypnosis. Maybe he had some medical knowledge. Maybe it was just incredible timing and luck. But every time Alexei is near death, Rasputin shows up, prays over the boy, and the bleeding stops. You can imagine what this does to Alexandra's mind. This filthy peasant is the only person who can save her son. She becomes completely dependent on him, and Rasputin, being no fool, uses this dependency to gain unprecedented access to the royal family. But here is where the story gets really scandalous. Rasputin does not just heal Alexei. He starts inserting himself into palace politics, giving advice on military strategy, recommending government ministers, even influencing Russia's involvement in World War I. And the rumors about his relationship with Alexandra, they are absolutely explosive. The gossip spreading through St. Petersburg is that Rasputin and Alexandra are lovers, that this peasant is sexually dominating the Empress of Russia. The stories get more and more graphic. They say Rasputin has hypnotized Alexandra, that he is performing dark rituals in the palace, that he is the real power behind the throne. Now, here is the fascinating part. There is almost no evidence that Alexandra and Rasputin ever had a physical affair. Their letters, which are found after the revolution, are intimate but not sexual. They are the desperate communications between a mother and the man she believes can save her child. But in the poisonous atmosphere of wartime Russia, facts do not matter. The perception of scandal is more powerful than the reality. The Russian people are suffering through World War I. Millions of soldiers are dying, food is scarce, and the economy is collapsing. And what do they see when they look at their royal family? An incompetent czar taking military advice from a peasant mystic who is supposedly sleeping with the empress. The monarchy's moral authority is being destroyed by rumors and whispers. Rasputin's behavior does not help his case. He is openly boasting about his influence over the royal family. He is accepting bribes from people who want access to the empress. He is seducing society women by claiming he has special powers. One witness described walking into a restaurant and seeing Rasputin surrounded by high society ladies, bragging about how he could do anything with the empress. The Russian nobility is horrified. Military officers are resigning rather than take orders they believe come from Rasputin. Government ministers are plotting against each other based on their relationship with the mystic. The entire structure of imperial Russian government is being warped by one man's supposed sexual hold over the empress. But Alexandra cannot give up Rasputin because she genuinely believes he is the only thing keeping her son alive. Every time Alexei has a bleeding episode, she calls for Rasputin. Every time he recovers, her faith in the mystic grows stronger. She is trapped in a psychological prison of her own making. The situation becomes so dangerous that even members of the royal family start plotting against Rasputin. Prince Felix Yusupov, one of the richest men in Russia, decides that Rasputin has to die. And the murder plot he hatches is absolutely wild. On December 29, 1916, Yusupov invites Rasputin to his palace for a late-night meeting. He feeds him cakes and wine laced with enough cyanide to kill 5 men. Rasputin eats everything and seems completely unaffected. Panicking, Yusupov shoots him in the chest. Rasputin collapses, apparently dead. But then, as Yusupov is celebrating with his co-conspirators, Rasputin's eyes snap open. He lunges at Yusupov, trying to strangle him, then staggers outside into the snow. The conspirators chase him down and shoot him 3 more times. They beat him with clubs, then throw his body into the frozen Neva River. When they find the body 3 days later, there is water in Rasputin's lungs, meaning he was still alive when he hit the water. This man survived poisoning, multiple gunshots, a beating, and nearly drowned in an icy river. No wonder people thought he had supernatural powers. But here is the tragic irony. Killing Rasputin did not save the monarchy. It might have actually hastened its destruction. Alexandra was so grief-stricken by Rasputin's murder that she withdrew even further from public life. The royal family became even more isolated and paranoid. And the Russian people, instead of celebrating Rasputin's death, started to see it as proof that the nobility was completely out of control. Within 2 months of Rasputin's murder, revolution broke out in St. Petersburg. Within a year, the entire Romanov family was dead, executed in a basement in Yekaterinburg. The 300-year-old dynasty that had ruled one of the world's greatest empires was wiped out. And it all started with rumors about a peasant mystic's relationship with a desperate mother. What is so haunting about the Rasputin affair is how it shows the power of perception over reality in politics. Alexandra probably never had a sexual relationship with Rasputin, but the belief that she did was enough to destroy her family's legitimacy. In our age of social media and instant global communication, this story feels remarkably relevant. Think about how conspiracy theories spread today, how political figures can be destroyed by rumors and innuendo, how the appearance of scandal can be more damaging than actual wrongdoing. Rasputin's story is a cautionary tale about how quickly public trust can evaporate when people believe their leaders are compromised. Here is a question for you. Do you think Alexandra could have saved her family by giving up Rasputin? Or was the Russian monarchy doomed regardless of what she did? I'm curious about your thoughts on whether personal loyalty should ever override political necessity. The fall of the Romanovs shows us how dangerous it can be when royal families become isolated from their people's reality. But isolation was not always a weakness for monarchs. Sometimes strategic distance and mysterious allure could be the key to maintaining power. Our next story takes us to Elizabethan England, where a queen turned her refusal to marry into the most effective political weapon in European history. Elizabeth I did not just avoid romantic scandals. She weaponized romance itself, using the promise of marriage to manipulate kings and emperors across Europe. Her love life politics were so brilliant, they helped England become a global superpower. While Rasputin's scandal destroyed the Romanovs through rumors and whispers, across Europe centuries earlier, another monarch was doing something absolutely revolutionary. She was turning romance itself into the ultimate political weapon. Elizabeth warned of England did not just avoid the romantic scandals that destroyed other royal families. She weaponized the very idea of marriage, using it to manipulate kings and emperors across Europe while building England into a global superpower. This is the story of how the Virgin Queen used love as warfare. But here is the mind-blowing twist that changes everything we think we know about Elizabeth. She probably was not actually a virgin at all. The woman who built her entire political identity around remaining unmarried likely had passionate love affairs that were so skillfully hidden they have remained secret for over 400 years. So, how did she pull off this incredible deception? And why did she choose political power over personal happiness? Step into England in 1558. Elizabeth is 25 years old and has just become queen of a small, relatively poor island nation that is torn apart by religious conflict. Spain controls most of the New World. France dominates continental Europe, and the Ottoman Empire threatens from the east. England is basically a minor player on the European stage, and everyone expects this young queen to quickly marry a powerful foreign prince to secure protection for her vulnerable kingdom. But Elizabeth has other plans. She has watched what happened to her sister Mary, who married Philip II of Spain, and became essentially a puppet ruler in her own country. She has seen how marriage turned powerful queens into political pawns, and she is determined not to make the same mistake. So, Elizabeth does something absolutely brilliant. She promises everyone everything while giving no one anything. She begins the most elaborate romantic chess game in European history, simultaneously courting multiple suitors while never actually committing to any of them. Her first major romantic manipulation involves Eric XIII of Sweden. Elizabeth spends 3 years flirting with the idea of marrying him, sending gifts, writing affectionate letters, even allowing Swedish ambassadors to believe an engagement is imminent. Meanwhile, she is using the threat of an English-Swedish alliance to terrify Philip II of Spain into offering her better trade deals. But the real masterpiece of Elizabeth's romantic strategy involves the Archduke Charles of Austria. For over a decade, Elizabeth strings along the Habsburgs with the possibility of this marriage. She negotiates dowries, discusses wedding dates, even haggles over whether Charles would be allowed to hear Catholic Mass in private. The Austrians are so convinced she is serious that they spend fortunes on embassy missions and diplomatic gifts. The whole time, Elizabeth has absolutely no intention of marrying Charles. She is using the marriage negotiations to prevent Austria from allying with France against England, while also keeping Spain from becoming too aggressive. It is diplomatic genius disguised as romantic indecision. But Elizabeth's most dangerous game involves Philip II of Spain himself. Now, Philip is the most powerful man in Europe. He controls Spain, the Netherlands, much of Italy, and vast territories in the Americas. He is also Elizabeth's former brother-in-law, having been married to her sister Mary, and he is getting increasingly frustrated with England's Protestant policies and support for Dutch rebels. So, when Philip starts making threatening noises about invading England, Elizabeth pulls out her most audacious move. She starts flirting with him. She sends him affectionate messages, hints that she might consider converting to Catholicism, even suggests that marriage between them might heal the religious divisions in Europe. Philip, who is dealing with rebellions across his empire and desperately needs England as an ally rather than an enemy, takes the bait completely. He delays his invasion plans, hoping that marriage might give him control over England without the cost and risk of war. Meanwhile, Elizabeth is using the time Philip gives her to build up England's navy, forge alliances with other Protestant nations, and prepare for the inevitable conflict. She is literally seducing Philip into giving her the time she needs to defend against him. But the most fascinating aspect of Elizabeth's romantic strategy involves her relationship with Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. This is the love of Elizabeth's life, her childhood friend, a man so handsome and charming that the entire court is convinced she will eventually marry him. Their relationship is so intense that foreign ambassadors report they seem like lovers whenever they are together. The problem? Dudley is already married. His wife, Amy Robsart, lives quietly in the countryside while her husband plays romantic games at court with the Queen. Then, in 1560, something happens that changes everything. Amy Robsart is found dead at the bottom of a staircase with a broken neck. The official verdict is accidental death, but everyone believes Dudley murdered his wife so he could marry Elizabeth. The scandal rocks England. Foreign courts are horrified at the idea that their queen might marry a suspected murderer. Elizabeth's own advisors warn her that marrying Dudley now would destroy her reputation forever. And here is where Elizabeth makes the most heartbreaking decision of her life. She chooses power over love. Despite being desperately in love with Dudley, she recognizes that marrying him would make her look weak and scandalous. So, she keeps him close as her favorite, probably continues a physical relationship with him, but never gives him the marriage he desperately wants. This decision allows Elizabeth to maintain her image as the Virgin Queen while actually having the romantic relationship she craves. It is the perfect compromise between personal desire and political necessity. Elizabeth's romantic manipulations reach their peak during the Spanish Armada crisis of 1588. Philip II, finally realizing he has been played for decades, launches the largest invasion fleet in history to conquer England. But Elizabeth has used her years of romantic deception to prepare England perfectly for this moment. The English fleet that defeats the Spanish Armada is built with wealth from trade deals Elizabeth negotiated while pretending to consider marriage alliances. The diplomatic isolation of Spain is partly the result of Elizabeth's romantic games with other European powers. She has literally seduced Europe into helping her defeat the man she once pretended to love. After the Armada's defeat, Elizabeth's power reaches its zenith. She has proven that a woman can rule alone, that marriage is not necessary for political survival, that romance can be a tool of statecraft rather than a weakness. England becomes a major European power, and Elizabeth becomes the most famous queen in the world. But there is a personal cost to Elizabeth's political success that is absolutely heartbreaking. In her private moments, she is desperately lonely. She never has children, never experiences the security of a true marriage, never allows herself the luxury of putting personal happiness before political calculation. In her final years, Elizabeth surrounds herself with handsome young courtiers like the Earl of Essex, men young enough to be her sons who remind her of the romantic life she sacrificed for power. It is both pathetic and admirable. A woman in her 60s still using romantic attraction as a political tool, but also a woman who has never stopped craving the love she gave up for her kingdom. When Elizabeth dies in 1603, she has transformed England from a minor European power into a nation poised to build a global empire. Her romantic manipulations have prevented multiple wars, secured crucial alliances, and bought England the time it needed to develop into a major power. But here is the question that haunts Elizabeth's legacy. Was her sacrifice worth it? She saved England by giving up personal happiness. But should any person, even a queen, be forced to choose between love and duty so completely? Elizabeth's story is particularly relevant in our modern age, where we still debate whether personal scandals should disqualify people from public office. She proved that romance could be used strategically rather than just emotionally, but she also paid a tremendous personal price for that strategic thinking. What do you think? Was Elizabeth brilliant for using romance as a political weapon, or tragic for sacrificing love for power? Let me know in the comments. Elizabeth's romantic manipulations helped make England a superpower, but her strategic use of love was nothing compared to what was happening simultaneously across the English Channel. While Elizabeth was playing romantic chess with European kings, another royal love affair was quietly developing that would have consequences far more dramatic than anything Elizabeth could imagine. We are about to witness how Napoleon Bonaparte's obsessive love for Josephine did not just reshape his personal life. It literally rewrote the map of Europe and changed the course of world history forever. Just as Elizabeth Thurs was mastering the art of romantic manipulation across the English Channel, another love story was beginning in revolutionary France that would make her political games look like child's play. This is the tale of Napoleon Bonaparte's catastrophic obsession with Josephine de Beauharnais. A love so consuming it literally rewrote the map of Europe. But here is what will absolutely shock you. The woman who conquered the world's greatest conqueror was actually cheating on him almost from the moment they met. What if I told you that Napoleon's most famous military disasters were not caused by tactical errors or superior enemies, but by his desperate need to impress a woman who did not even love him back? That the downfall of the French Empire can be traced directly to one man's inability to get over his first heartbreak. Welcome to history's most expensive midlife crisis. Transport yourself to Paris, 1795. The French Revolution is winding down, leaving behind a city full of widows, orphans, and opportunists trying to survive in the new order. One of these survivors is Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie, known to history as Josephine. She is 32 years old, a single mother of two, and her aristocratic husband was guillotined during the Terror. She is basically doing whatever it takes to survive, including having affairs with influential men who can protect her and her children. Enter Napoleon Bonaparte, a 26-year-old artillery officer from Corsica who is quickly making a name for himself in the Revolutionary Army. He is short, awkward, intense, and absolutely mesmerized by this elegant, sophisticated woman who represents everything his provincial background lacks. But here is what makes their first meeting so fascinating. They are completely wrong for each other. Napoleon is obsessive, possessive, and desperately romantic. Josephine is casual about love, enjoys flirting with multiple men, and sees relationships as social and financial transactions rather than grand passions. Yet, Napoleon becomes completely obsessed. Listen to this letter he writes to her just weeks after they meet. I awake full of you. Your image and the memory of last night's intoxicating pleasures has left no rest to my senses. This is a man who is about to conquer Europe, and he is writing like a lovesick teenager. Josephine, meanwhile, is trying to figure out if this intense young general is worth the trouble. She writes to a friend, Bonaparte is a funny little creature. I do not know what he possesses, but there is something I cannot understand it myself. Even she does not understand why she is attracted to him. They marry in March 1796, and immediately Napoleon makes his first major strategic error caused by love. Instead of consolidating his position in Paris, he rushes off to command the army of Italy, partly to impress Josephine with military glory. He is literally trying to conquer northern Italy as a romantic gesture. But while Napoleon is off winning battles and writing passionate love letters, Josephine is having an affair with a young officer named Hippolyte Charles. The irony is devastating. While Napoleon is conquering territory to prove his love, Josephine is in Paris, laughing about his romantic letters with her lover. The affair with Charles becomes an open secret in Parisian society. Everyone knows except Napoleon, who is too busy fighting Austrians to pay attention to gossip. When he finally returns to Paris as a conquering hero, he is so blinded by his success and his love for Josephine that he misses all the obvious signs. Then comes Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1798. And this is where his obsession with Josephine starts to affect world history. Napoleon decides to invade Egypt partly for strategic reasons, to threaten British trade routes to India, but he also wants to return as an exotic, mysterious conqueror who will finally be worthy of Josephine's complete devotion. The problem? While Napoleon is discovering the Rosetta Stone and fighting Mamluks in the desert, Josephine's affair with Charles becomes so blatant that even Napoleon's family starts writing to tell him about it. His brother Lucien sends detailed reports about Josephine's infidelity. When Napoleon finally learns the truth, he goes completely mad with rage and heartbreak. He is stuck in Egypt, unable to return to confront his wife, and the psychological torment starts affecting his military judgment. He begins making reckless decisions, pushing deeper into Syria, ignoring the advice of his generals. The Battle of Acre in 1799 is Napoleon's first major defeat, and it happens partly because he is so emotionally destroyed by Josephine's betrayal that he cannot think strategically. He is trying to capture Ottoman territory to prove he is still a great conqueror worthy of his wife's love, even though she is probably in bed with another man while he is getting shot at in the desert. When Napoleon finally returns to France in 1799, he confronts Josephine in one of the most dramatic marital showdowns in history. She locks herself in their bedroom and refuses to come out. He threatens divorce. She cries and promises to be faithful. He eventually forgives her, but their relationship is permanently changed. And here is where Napoleon's emotional damage starts reshaping European politics. To prove he has moved past the humiliation of Josephine's affair, Napoleon throws himself into increasingly ambitious military campaigns. The wars that will consume Europe for the next 15 years are partly driven by one man's need to prove his worth to a woman who has already proven she does not truly love him. Napoleon's coronation as emperor in 1804 is essentially an elaborate attempt to impress Josephine. He is creating an empire partly to give her the title of empress, to surround her with enough luxury and prestige that she will never want to leave him again. But the crown does not fix their fundamental problem. Napoleon desperately needs an heir, and Josephine cannot give him children. By 1807, as Napoleon reaches the height of his power, controlling most of continental Europe, this issue becomes a crisis that threatens everything he has built. The divorce negotiations between Napoleon and Josephine in 1809 are heartbreaking to read about. Napoleon genuinely loves her. She is the only woman who ever made him feel truly vulnerable. But he is also an emperor who needs legitimate heirs to secure his dynasty. Josephine, meanwhile, has grown to genuinely care for Napoleon, but she is also terrified of losing her position and wealth. The divorce ceremony is so emotional that both of them break down crying as they read their prepared statements. Here is the tragic irony. Napoleon divorces Josephine to secure his dynasty by marrying Marie-Louise of Austria and having a legitimate heir. But this decision ultimately destroys his empire. The marriage to Marie-Louise gives Austria a direct stake in French politics. When Napoleon starts losing battles, his new wife's family becomes his enemies rather than his allies. Josephine, meanwhile, retires to her estate at Malmaison, where she creates one of the most beautiful gardens in Europe and lives relatively quietly until her death in 1814. She outlives Napoleon's empire by just a few months. But here is what is most fascinating about Napoleon's obsession with Josephine. It shows how personal relationships can literally reshape the world when you have enough power. Napoleon's need to prove himself worthy of Josephine's love drove him to military campaigns that changed European borders for generations. Think about the butterfly effect. If Josephine had been faithful, would Napoleon have been content with smaller conquests? If she had been able to give him children, would he have avoided the disastrous Russian campaign that destroyed his army? Would Europe have been spared 15 years of warfare if one woman had loved one man the way he needed to be loved? The Napoleon-Josephine relationship is also a masterclass in how toxic relationships can become addictive. Even after their divorce, Napoleon continued writing to Josephine, asking for her advice, sending her gifts. When he was exiled to Elba, some of his last letters were to her. She had become such an essential part of his identity that he could not imagine himself without her. What is your take on this? Do you think Napoleon's obsession with Josephine was romantic or pathological? Was he a tragic figure destroyed by unrequited love, or a dangerous man whose personal insecurities caused massive suffering? I would love to hear your thoughts. Napoleon's story proves that even the most powerful people in history can be completely undone by love and heartbreak. But personal vulnerability is not always a weakness for rulers. Sometimes the most effective leaders are those who understand how to channel their own emotional experiences into political wisdom. Just as Napoleon's heartbreak was reshaping Europe through conquest and war, on the other side of the world, an entirely different kind of love story was quietly unfolding in the Byzantine Empire. The romance between Emperor Justinian and Theodora was not just about personal passion. It was about a former courtesan who used her relationship with the most powerful man in the world to revolutionize law, religion, and society. Theodora's journey from the lowest rungs of society to the height of imperial power is one of the most remarkable transformation stories in human history. While Napoleon was letting his heartbreak reshape European warfare, centuries earlier in the glittering capital of Constantinople, a love story was unfolding that makes every other royal romance look tame by comparison. This is the incredible tale of how a former courtesan named Theodora seduced her way from the brothels of Byzantine society to become one of history's most powerful empresses. But here is the part that will absolutely blow your mind. She did not just marry up for wealth and status. She used her position to revolutionize an entire empire and create laws that are still influencing our world today. Imagine if someone told you that a woman who once performed nude on stage became co-ruler of the Roman Empire and helped write legal codes that protected women's rights for over 1,000 years. You would think it was impossible, right? Well, get ready to have your assumptions about power, class, and social mobility completely shattered. Let us journey back to Constantinople in the early 500s AD. The Byzantine Empire is the last remnant of Rome's former glory, controlling trade routes between Europe and Asia, commanding vast wealth, and maintaining the most sophisticated legal system in the world. Into this world of palace intrigue and religious debate comes a young woman whose story reads like the most outrageous fiction. Theodora is born around 500 AD into the absolute bottom of Byzantine society. Her father is a bear trainer at the hippodrome, basically a circus performer. When he dies, Theodora's mother does whatever it takes to survive, and that includes pushing her daughters into entertainment work that is barely distinguishable from prostitution. By her teens, Theodora is performing in what can only be described as ancient strip shows. The historian Procopius, who absolutely despised her, describes performances where Theodora would recreate the myth of Leda and the Swan, involving scenarios that are so explicit, I cannot repeat them in detail. Let us just say that Theodora's early career involved forms of public entertainment that would make modern reality TV look like Sunday school. But here is what makes Theodora extraordinary. She is not just surviving in this world. She is studying it. She is learning how power works, how men think, how to read people's desires and weaknesses. She is becoming a master manipulator in the most sophisticated society on earth. Then something changes Theodora's trajectory completely. Around 520 AD, she meets a man named Hesibulus, a provincial governor who takes her to North Africa as his mistress. But the relationship sours, and Hesibulus abandons her in Alexandria, Egypt. Theodora finds herself alone, broke, and thousands of miles from Constantinople. This is where Theodora's story takes a fascinating turn. Instead of returning to her old life, she uses her time in Alexandria to completely reinvent herself. She studies with Christian theologians, learning about Monophysite Christianity, a complex theological position that will later influence imperial policy. She is essentially getting a graduate education in religion and philosophy. When Theodora returns to Constantinople around 522 AD, she is transformed. Gone is the crude entertainer. In her place is a sophisticated woman who can discuss theology with bishops and philosophy with scholars. She has learned to dress elegantly, speak eloquently, and present herself as a refined lady rather than a former prostitute. And that is when she meets Justinian. Justinian is the nephew of Emperor Justin I, a man clearly destined for the throne himself. He is intelligent, ambitious, and completely fascinated by this mysterious woman who seems to understand the complexities of power better than most nobles who were born to it. But their relationship creates a massive scandal. Byzantine law explicitly forbids senators from marrying actresses, and Theodora's past makes her completely unsuitable as a potential empress. The imperial court is horrified. Justinian's family tries desperately to break them up. Here is where the story gets really incredible. Justinian is so obsessed with Theodora that he is willing to change the law itself to marry her. In 525 AD, he convinces his uncle, Emperor Justin, to repeal the law preventing senators from marrying actresses. Think about that. Theodora's love affair literally rewrote imperial legislation. When they finally marry in 525 AD, it is one of the most shocking social climbs in human history. A woman who was performing nude in theaters less than a decade earlier is now positioned to become empress of the Byzantine Empire. But Theodora does not just become a decorative empress. When Justinian becomes emperor in 527 AD, she becomes his full partner in ruling the empire. And this is where her story becomes truly revolutionary. The first major crisis of their reign comes in 532 AD, with the Nika riots. These are not just ordinary civil disturbances. They are a full-scale revolution that threatens to overthrow Justinian's government. For a week, Constantinople burns as rebels control most of the city and proclaim a new emperor. Justinian's advisors are telling him to flee. Ships are prepared to evacuate the imperial family. The emperor is ready to run. And then Theodora stands up in the imperial council and delivers a speech that changes the course of history. According to the historian Procopius, she says, "Those who have worn the crown should never survive its loss. Never will I see the day when I am not saluted as empress. If you mean to flee, Caesar, well and good. You have the money. The ships are ready. The sea is open. As for me, I shall stay." Then she delivers the line that becomes legendary. Purple makes the best burial shroud. This speech rallies Justinian's courage. Instead of fleeing, they decide to fight. The imperial army crushes the rebellion, killing an estimated 30,000 rioters in the Hippodrome. Theodora's refusal to run saves Justinian's throne and cements her position as the real power behind the empire. But Theodora's influence goes far beyond crisis management. She uses her position to revolutionize Byzantine law and society. Remember, this is a woman who experienced the absolute worst of what society could do to women, and now she has the power to change it. Working with Justinian, Theodora pushes through legal reforms that are absolutely revolutionary for the 6th century. They pass laws protecting women from forced prostitution. Theodora literally uses her position to help women in situations like her own past. They strengthen penalties for rape. They give women more rights in divorce proceedings. Most remarkably, they pass laws allowing former prostitutes to marry into respectable society and inherit property. Theodora is essentially legalizing her own social transformation and extending those opportunities to other women. Theodora also becomes a major force in religious politics. She supports monophysite Christianity, often in opposition to her husband's policies. She provides sanctuary for persecuted monophysite clergy in the imperial palace. She is using her position to protect religious minorities again, drawing on her own experience of being marginalized and persecuted. The most famous example of Theodora's religious influence involves Pope Vigilius. When theological disputes threaten to tear apart the empire, Theodora literally has the Pope kidnapped and brought to Constantinople for negotiations. She is not just influencing policy, she is directly commanding the leader of Western Christianity. What is so remarkable about Theodora's story is how she uses every aspect of her background as a source of strength. Her experience in the theater gives her an understanding of how to perform power convincingly. Her time as a courtesan teaches her how to read and manipulate people. Her religious studies give her intellectual credibility. Her experience of poverty and marginalization makes her a passionate advocate for the powerless. By the time of her death in 548 AD, Theodora has completely transformed both her own life and the Byzantine Empire. The legal code she helped create survived for over 1,000 years. The precedent she sets for powerful empresses influences Byzantine politics for centuries. But here is what is most inspiring about Theodora's story. She proves that your past does not have to determine your future. In a society that believed social mobility was impossible, she climbed from the absolute bottom to the absolute top through intelligence, determination, and strategic thinking. Theodora's transformation also challenges our assumptions about power and respectability. The skills that made her successful as a courtesan reading people, understanding desire, performing convincingly, were exactly the skills that made her an effective empress. What do you think about Theodora's journey? Is she an inspiring example of someone overcoming their circumstances, or a cautionary tale about the corrupting influence of power? I'm genuinely curious about your perspective. Theodora's story shows us that love affairs can be more than just personal dramas. They can be vehicles for complete social transformation. But not every royal romance leads to positive change. Sometimes love becomes the spark that ignites conflicts lasting for generations. Our journey through love affairs that nearly destroyed kingdoms now takes us to medieval England, where a passionate friendship between a king and his archbishop created a religious and political crisis that would echo through centuries. The relationship between Henry II and Thomas Becket started as the deepest friendship in medieval Europe. But it ended in murder, martyrdom, and a conflict between church and state that still influences our world today. From Theodora's remarkable transformation in Byzantium, we find ourselves in medieval England, where another intense relationship was about to tear apart both a kingdom and the foundations of European Christianity. This is not a traditional love story between a man and a woman. This is the tale of the deepest, most passionate friendship in medieval history. One that began with two men who loved each other like brothers and ended with murder in a cathedral. The relationship between King Henry II and Thomas Becket did not just destroy their friendship. It created a conflict between church and state that still shapes our world today. But here is the shocking twist that changes everything about this story. The murder that ended their friendship may have been motivated by something far more intimate and personal than political disagreement. What if the most famous martyrdom in medieval history was actually the result of a lover's quarrel gone catastrophically wrong? Picture England in 1154. Henry II has just become king at age 21, inheriting an empire that stretches from Scotland to the Pyrenees. He is intelligent, energetic, and absolutely determined to centralize power in a kingdom that has been torn apart by civil war. But he needs someone he can trust absolutely to help him rebuild royal authority. Enter Thomas Becket, a merchant's son from London who has worked his way up through sheer brilliance to become one of the most skilled administrators in England. When Henry meets Thomas, it is like finding his missing half. Thomas is everything Henry needs: sophisticated, educated, charming, and completely loyal to the crown. But their relationship goes far deeper than just political alliance. These two men become absolutely inseparable. They eat together, hunt together, travel together. Contemporary chroniclers describe a friendship so intense it scandalizes the medieval court. They share everything: secrets, ambitions, even clothes. Thomas becomes not just Henry's chancellor, but his closest confidant. Here is what makes their bond so fascinating. Thomas essentially becomes Henry's alter ego. Henry is passionate and impulsive. Thomas is calculating and diplomatic. Henry dreams up grand schemes. Thomas figures out how to make them work. They complement each other perfectly, and together they start transforming England into the most efficiently governed kingdom in Europe. But there is something about their relationship that makes the medieval court deeply uncomfortable. The chronicles describe their intimacy in language that is remarkably suggestive for the time. They are constantly together. They finish each other's sentences, and Thomas seems to understand Henry's thoughts before Henry himself does. Thomas also starts living like a king rather than a chancellor. He maintains a household that is more lavish than most nobles, travels with an entourage fit for royalty, and represents England on diplomatic missions with a magnificence that astounds foreign courts. It is as if Henry is sharing not just his power, but his royal identity with Thomas. This arrangement works perfectly until 1162, when Henry makes what seems like a brilliant political move. He appoints Thomas as Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest religious position in England. Henry's reasoning is simple. With his best friend controlling the church, he can finally bring religious authority under royal control. But the moment Thomas becomes archbishop, everything changes. Almost overnight, he transforms from Henry's loyal partner into the church's most uncompromising defender. He starts wearing hair shirts, fasting regularly, and washing the feet of beggars. The sophisticated courtier becomes an ascetic monk practically overnight. Henry is absolutely bewildered by this transformation. The man who used to share his every thought is now opposing his every policy. When Henry tries to extend royal justice over church courts, Thomas refuses. When Henry demands that church revenues help fund royal projects, Thomas says no. The partnership that once seemed unbreakable suddenly becomes a bitter conflict. But here is what makes their break so heartbreaking. You can see in the historical records how desperately Henry tries to win Thomas back. He sends messengers begging Thomas to reconsider. He offers compromises he would never offer to anyone else. He is like a heartbroken lover trying to save a relationship that is already over. Thomas, meanwhile, seems equally tormented by the conflict. He genuinely loves Henry, but he is convinced that God is calling him to defend the church against royal interference. He is torn between his earthly loyalty to Henry and his spiritual duty to the church. The conflict reaches crisis in 1164 with the Constitutions of Clarendon, Henry's attempt to formally define the relationship between church and royal authority. When Thomas initially agrees to the constitutions, but then changes his mind and refuses to seal them, Henry feels completely betrayed. What happens next reads like the medieval equivalent of a messy breakup. Thomas flees England in exile, spending 6 years in France, writing angry letters to Henry and appealing to the Pope for support. Henry, meanwhile, is seizing church property and making Thomas's life as difficult as possible. But even during their estrangement, you can see how much they still care about each other. Henry repeatedly sends envoys trying to negotiate Thomas's return. Thomas writes letters that are angry, but also deeply personal, full of references to their shared past and their former intimacy. The reconciliation in 1170 seems like it might heal their relationship. Thomas returns to England, and for a moment, it looks like they might recapture their old partnership. But Thomas immediately starts excommunicating bishops who supported Henry during the exile. He is basically using his spiritual authority to punish Henry's allies. Henry, who has been hoping for reconciliation, explodes in fury. And this is where he speaks the words that will haunt him forever. In front of his court, probably after drinking heavily, Henry shouts something like, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and brought up in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born cleric. 4 of Henry's knights hear these words and decide to take action. On December 29th, 1170, they ride to Canterbury Cathedral and confront Thomas during evening prayers. What happens next becomes one of the most famous martyrdoms in Christian history. The knights demand that Thomas lift the excommunications. When he refuses, they try to drag him out of the cathedral. Thomas breaks free and runs toward the altar, but the knights catch him and hack him to death with their swords. His brains are scattered across the cathedral floor. But here is the detail that makes this murder so personal and heartbreaking. As Thomas is dying, he reportedly calls out Henry's name. Even in his final moments, he is thinking about the man who was once closer to him than anyone else in the world. The aftermath of Thomas's murder is catastrophic for Henry. Within days, miracles are being reported at Thomas's tomb. The Pope canonizes Thomas as Saint Thomas Becket in 1173. Pilgrims start flocking to Canterbury from across Europe. Henry, instead of solving his conflict with the Church, has created Christianity's newest and most popular martyr. The political consequences are devastating. Henry's enemies use Thomas's martyrdom to paint him as a tyrant who murders holy men. Rebellions break out across his empire. His own sons turn against him, partly inspired by the narrative that their father is a killer of saints. In 1174, Henry is forced to perform one of the most humiliating acts of penance in medieval history. He walks barefoot through Canterbury, allows himself to be whipped by monks, and spends the night praying at Thomas's tomb. The most powerful king in Europe is reduced to begging forgiveness from his former friend's ghost. But the personal cost to Henry goes far beyond political humiliation. Contemporary chronicles describe him as a broken man after Thomas's death. He never again forms a friendship as close as what he had with Thomas. He becomes suspicious, paranoid, and increasingly isolated. The conflict between Henry and Thomas also establishes a precedent that shapes European politics for centuries. The idea that religious authority can legitimately resist secular power becomes a cornerstone of medieval political theory. The murder makes Thomas a symbol of principled resistance to tyranny. What is so tragic about Henry and Thomas's story is how preventable it all was. If Henry had chosen someone else as archbishop, if Thomas had been more willing to compromise, if Henry had controlled his temper that December night, history might have been completely different. But their story also raises fascinating questions about the nature of intense relationships and power. Was their friendship so close that it became psychologically unsustainable when they found themselves on opposite sides? Did Henry's fury come from political frustration or personal betrayal? I am curious what you think. Was Henry and Thomas's relationship just an intense friendship, or was there something deeper going on that medieval chroniclers could not openly discuss? The level of emotional intensity in their story certainly seems to go beyond normal political partnerships. The murder of Thomas Becket shows us how personal relationships can have massive historical consequences. But intimate relationships do not always destroy political systems. Sometimes they create them. Our next story takes us to Imperial China, where another love affair between a ruler and someone considered socially inappropriate did not just threaten an empire. It actually brought down one of the greatest dynasties in Chinese history. all because an emperor fell so completely in love with one woman that he forgot how to rule an empire. Across the world, from medieval England's church-state conflicts, an even more catastrophic love story was unfolding in Tang Dynasty China that would make Henry and Thomas's tragedy look like a minor disagreement. This is the tale of Emperor Xuanzong and Yang Guifei, a romance so all-consuming that it literally ended what historians call the golden age of Chinese civilization. But here is the twist that will absolutely stagger you. Yang Guifei was not just any woman. She was originally the emperor's own daughter-in-law, and their forbidden love affair triggered the deadliest rebellion in human history. What if I told you that one woman's beauty was so legendary it caused a war that killed 36 million people? That an emperor's obsession with his son's wife brought down a dynasty that had ruled for nearly 300 years. Welcome to the most expensive midlife crisis in world history, where love literally destroyed a civilization. Step into Chang'an in 745 AD, the largest city in the world with over 1 million inhabitants. The Tang Dynasty is at its absolute peak, controlling territory from Korea to Central Asia, commanding trade routes that stretch from Japan to the Mediterranean, and presiding over what historians call the most cosmopolitan society in human history. At the center of this golden age sits Emperor Xuanzong, now 60 years old and one of the most successful rulers in Chinese history. For 3 decades, he has expanded the empire, patronized the arts, and created a period of prosperity that Chinese people still look back on as their civilization's highest achievement. But there is one problem. Xuanzong is getting bored. This is a man who has everything: absolute power, vast wealth, thousands of concubines, palaces that take days to walk through. He has achieved every goal a Chinese emperor could dream of. And that is exactly when Yang Guifei enters his life and changes everything. Yang Guifei is originally Yang Yuhuan, the wife of Prince Xu, one of Xuanzong's sons. She is considered one of the 4 great beauties of Chinese history. But more importantly, she is intelligent, musically gifted, and has a personality that completely captivates the aging emperor. The exact details of how their affair begins are lost to history, but we know that by 745 AD, Xuanzong has become completely obsessed with his daughter-in-law. And here is where the story becomes absolutely scandalous. Instead of keeping the affair secret, Xuanzong decides to make Yang Guifei his official concubine. This requires some incredible legal gymnastics. First, Yang Guifei has to become a Taoist nun to technically end her marriage to Prince Xu. Then, she is given a new identity and formally inducted into the imperial harem. Xuanzong is essentially stealing his son's wife and making it legal through bureaucratic manipulation. But the scandal of the relationship is nothing compared to what Xuanzong does next. He becomes completely obsessed with making Yang Guifei happy. This 60-year-old emperor, who spent decades focused on governance and military strategy, suddenly starts spending all his time and energy on romantic gestures. The scale of Xuanzong's romantic gestures is absolutely mind-boggling. When Yang Guifei mentioned she likes lychee fruit, which only grows in southern China, Xuanzong establishes a relay system of fast horses to bring fresh lychees from Guangzhou to Chang'an, a journey of over 1,000 miles. Think about that. He is using the imperial postal system designed for urgent military communications to deliver fruit to his girlfriend. Yang Guifei loves to dance, so Xuanzong builds her private theaters and hires the best musicians in the empire to compose music just for her performances. She enjoys luxury, so he showers her with jewels, silks, and perfumes that cost more than most provincial budgets. But here is where Xuanzong's obsession starts affecting the empire. He begins neglecting his imperial duties to spend time with Yang Guifei. Court sessions are canceled because the emperor is watching his concubine practice dance. Military briefings are postponed because Xuanzong is composing poetry for Yang Guifei. The really dangerous change is that Xuanzong starts letting Yang Guifei's family members into positions of power. Yang Guifei's cousin, Yang Guozhong, becomes the Chancellor of China despite having no qualifications beyond his family connection. Other young family members receive provincial governorships, military commands, and high court positions. This nepotism creates a massive problem because the Yang family has no idea how to actually run an empire. They are focused on enriching themselves rather than governing effectively. Meanwhile, Xuanzong is so blinded by love that he does not notice how badly his empire is being mismanaged. The poet Du Fu, writing during this period, captures the empire's decline perfectly. Behind the vermilion gates, wine and meat go to waste, while on the roads lie the bones of those frozen to death. While Xuanzong and Yang Guifei are enjoying lavish banquets, ordinary Chinese people are suffering from neglect and corruption. But the real crisis comes from the military side of the empire. To pay for Yang Guifei's luxuries and her family's corruption, Xuanzong raises taxes dramatically. He also starts relying heavily on foreign generals to control frontier regions because they are cheaper than Chinese troops. One of these foreign generals is Lushan, a man of Central Asian and Turkish descent who commands the northeastern frontier. Lushan is brilliant, ambitious, and completely ruthless. He is also smart enough to recognize that Xuanzong's obsession with Yang Guifei has created a power vacuum that he can exploit. Here is where the story takes a truly bizarre turn. Lushan starts visiting the capital regularly and somehow convinces Yang Guifei to adopt him as her son. Yes, you read that correctly. The general who is about to rebel against the emperor becomes the adopted son of the emperor's favorite concubine. This adoption gives Lushan incredible access to the imperial court. He can visit Yang Guifei privately, attend palace banquets, and observe firsthand how distracted and weak Xuanzong has become. He is essentially conducting reconnaissance for his future rebellion while being welcomed as a family member. The Anlushan rebellion explodes in 755 AD, and it is absolutely devastating. Lushan commands experienced frontier troops who easily defeat the pampered imperial armies. Within months, he captures the secondary capital of Luoyang and proclaims himself emperor of a new dynasty. As Lushan's forces march toward Chang'an, Xuanzong finally realizes the catastrophic consequences of his romantic obsession. But it is too late. The imperial army is unprepared. The government is paralyzed by corruption, and the people have lost faith in a dynasty that has been neglecting them for a decade. In 756 AD, as rebel forces approach Chang'an, Xuanzong is forced to flee his capital in one of the most humiliating retreats in Chinese history. But here is where the story becomes absolutely heartbreaking. During the retreat, Xuanzong's own imperial guards mutiny and demand that Yang Guifei be executed. The guards blame Yang Guifei for the empire's collapse. They argue that her influence corrupted Xuanzong, that her family's corruption weakened the government, and that her very existence has brought disaster to China. They refuse to continue protecting the emperor unless she dies. Xuanzong is faced with an impossible choice: save the woman he loves or save his dynasty. In one of the most tragic scenes in Chinese history, he is forced to watch as Yang Guifei is strangled with a silk cord at Mawei Post Station. The great love story that began with lychees and dancing ends with murder and imperial collapse. But Yang Guifei's death does not save the Tang dynasty. The An Lushan Rebellion continues for 8 more years, devastating China and killing an estimated 36 million people, roughly 13% of the world's population at the time. Even after the rebellion is finally suppressed, the Tang dynasty never recovers its former power and glory. Xuanzong lives for another 6 years after Yang Guifei's death, but he is essentially a broken man. He abdicates in favor of his son and spends his final years writing poetry about his lost love. The emperor who once ruled the greatest empire on earth becomes a tragic figure mourning a romance that destroyed everything he had built. The story of Xuanzong and Yang Guifei becomes legendary in Chinese culture, inspiring countless poems, operas, and novels. But it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting personal passion above public duty. What is particularly tragic about their story is how preventable the disaster was. If Xuanzong had kept his affair private, if he had not promoted Yang Guifei's incompetent relatives, if he had not neglected his imperial duties, the Tang dynasty might have continued its golden age for centuries longer. Their romance raises profound questions about leadership and responsibility. When you hold absolute power, do your personal relationships become inherently political? Can a ruler ever truly separate private happiness from public duty? What do you think? Was Xuanzong's love for Yang Guifei a beautiful romance destroyed by cruel circumstances? Or was it a selfish obsession that cost millions of lives? The answer probably depends on whether you are thinking like a romantic or a historian. The fall of the Tang dynasty shows us how even the greatest civilizations can be brought down by the personal weaknesses of their leaders. But China's imperial system survived this catastrophe and adapted, learning to better balance imperial power with institutional constraints. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, another empire was developing its own unique approach to managing the relationship between royal power and romantic desire. The Ottoman Empire's harem system was designed to prevent exactly the kind of destructive imperial romance that doomed the Tang. But as we are about to discover, the Ottomans learned that you cannot control love through institutional design, and their own harem intrigues would prove just as politically explosive as any traditional royal romance. The Tang dynasty's collapse taught future empires a harsh lesson about the dangers of uncontrolled imperial romance. So when the Ottoman Empire rose to power centuries later, they thought they had the perfect solution: create a harem system so sophisticated that it would channel royal desire into political advantage rather than dynastic disaster. But what they actually created was something far more dangerous: a hidden kingdom of women who learned to rule an empire from behind veils and locked doors. This is the story of how the Ottoman harem became the real seat of power in one of history's greatest empires. Here is what will absolutely shock you about the Ottoman harem. It was not just a pleasure palace for sultans. It was the most effective political training ground for women in the medieval world. These were not passive concubines waiting around to please their master. They were brilliant political operators who manipulated succession, controlled imperial policy, and essentially ruled the Ottoman Empire for over a century. Welcome to the era historians call the Sultanate of Women, where the most powerful people in the empire were not the sultans, they were their mothers. Transport yourself to the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul around 1520. The Ottoman Empire stretches from the gates of Vienna to the Indian Ocean, controlling 3 continents and ruling over 15 million people. At the heart of this vast empire sits the imperial harem, a complex of over 300 rooms housing up to 1,000 women at its peak. But this is not the Hollywood version of a harem you might imagine. The imperial harem is more like a combination of Harvard Business School, the CIA, and a royal court all rolled into one. The women here are not just beautiful, they are intelligent, educated, and trained in everything from languages and music to politics and espionage. Here is how the system is supposed to work. Young girls, usually captured in raids or sent as tribute, are brought to the harem as children. They are educated, converted to Islam, and trained in court etiquette. The most talented rise through a strict hierarchy, from novice to lady-in-waiting to concubine. If they are lucky enough to catch the sultan's attention and bear him a son, they might become a consort with real political influence. The theory is brilliant. Instead of dangerous dynastic marriages with foreign powers, Ottoman sultans will choose their partners from women who have no external political connections, no foreign interference, no divided loyalties, no messy diplomatic complications, just pure imperial control. But the women in the harem quickly figure out how to turn this system to their advantage. And the master of this game is a woman known to history as Roxolana, or Hurrem Sultan. Roxolana arrives in the harem around 1520 as a teenage captive from what is now Ukraine. By all accounts, she is not the most beautiful woman in the harem, but she has something far more valuable. She is absolutely brilliant at reading people and understanding power dynamics. When Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent notices her, Roxolana does not just try to please him. She makes herself indispensable to him. She learns to read and write Ottoman Turkish perfectly. She becomes his advisor on political matters. Most importantly, she convinces him to break centuries of Ottoman tradition and marry her officially. This is absolutely revolutionary. Ottoman sultans do not marry their concubines. It gives the women too much official status and their children too strong a claim to succession. But Roxolana is so skillful at manipulation that she convinces Suleiman to make her his legal wife, giving her unprecedented power and protection. But Roxolana's real masterstroke is how she eliminates her competition. The Ottoman succession system is brutally simple. When a sultan dies, his sons fight it out, and the winner kills all his brothers to prevent future civil wars. Roxolana has several sons, but there is already an older prince, Mustafa, from another consort who is the obvious heir. So, Roxolana does something absolutely Machiavellian. She convinces Suleiman that Mustafa is plotting against him. She plants evidence, manipulates court gossip, and gradually builds a case that his eldest son is a traitor. In 1553, Suleiman has Mustafa strangled, clearing the path for Roxolana's own sons to inherit the throne. The implications of this are staggering. Roxolana, a former slave girl from a Ukrainian village, has successfully manipulated the succession of the most powerful empire in the world. She has essentially chosen who will rule over 15 million people, but Roxolana's influence extends far beyond palace intrigue. She becomes Suleiman's partner in governing the empire. She corresponds with foreign rulers, influences military campaigns, and even funds major construction projects, including mosques and charitable institutions that still exist today. When Roxolana dies in 1558, she has established a template that other harem women quickly learn to follow. The next generation of imperial women becomes even more politically sophisticated. The woman who takes this system to its logical extreme is Nurbanu Sultan, who rules the Ottoman Empire as regent for her son Murad III in the late 1500s. Nurbanu does not just influence policy from behind the scenes. She essentially becomes the de facto ruler of the empire. Foreign ambassadors quickly learn that if they want anything done in the Ottoman government, they need to negotiate with Nurbanu rather than her son. Venetian diplomatic reports from this period describe her as the true sultan who makes all major decisions while Murad focuses on pleasures and ceremonies. But the most powerful woman in Ottoman history is probably Kösem Sultan, who dominates imperial politics for over 40 years in the early 1600s. Kösem serves as regent for two different sultans. First her son Murad IV, then her grandson Mehmed IV. For decades, she is essentially the ruler of the Ottoman Empire. Kösem's political skills are absolutely extraordinary. She manages to maintain power through palace coups, military rebellions, and succession crises that would have destroyed less capable rulers. She is negotiating with foreign powers, commanding military campaigns, and making economic policy decisions. The Venetian ambassador Alvise Contarini writes about Kösem. She possesses the greatest authority and rules the empire with absolute dominion. Think about that. A Venetian diplomat is reporting that the Ottoman Empire is being ruled by a woman who was originally captured as a child and sold into slavery. But here is what makes the Sultanate of Women so fascinating. These women are operating within a system designed to control them. Yet they have turned it into a mechanism for wielding unprecedented power. They are using the very constraints of harem life, the secrecy, the isolation, the focus on personal relationships, as tools for political manipulation. The harem women become masters of soft power in ways that would impress modern political scientists. They build networks of loyal allies throughout the empire. They use charitable works to build public support. They manipulate succession laws to ensure their children inherit power. They are essentially running a shadow government from within the palace walls. But this female-dominated system also creates its own problems. By the mid-1600s, the constant palace intrigue and manipulation of succession has weakened the empire's stability. Sultans are chosen based on their mother's political skills rather than their own governing abilities. Military leadership suffers because promotion depends more on palace connections than battlefield competence. The assassination of Kösem Sultan in 1651 marks the end of the Sultanate of Women era. she is strangled by rival court factions who have grown tired of female domination of imperial politics. But by then, the precedent has been set. Ottoman women have proven that even in the most restrictive societies, intelligence and determination can overcome seemingly impossible barriers to power. What is remarkable about the Ottoman harem system is how it demonstrates that institutional design can never completely control human nature. The Ottomans thought they were creating a system to manage imperial romance safely, but what they actually created was a training ground for some of history's most effective female political leaders. The harem women's success also challenges our assumptions about power and gender in historical societies. We tend to think of medieval and early modern women as powerless, but the Sultanate of Women shows us that women could wield enormous influence even in societies that seem designed to exclude them from politics. Do you think the harem system was progressive for giving women a path to power, or oppressive for limiting their opportunities to that single avenue? It is a complex question that does not have easy answers. The Ottoman story shows us that love and politics are always interconnected, no matter how much rulers try to separate them. Even the most carefully designed institutional systems cannot eliminate the human elements of desire, ambition, and emotional manipulation from governance. But while the Ottoman women were mastering the art of hidden influence in Istanbul, across the Atlantic, a very different kind of political system was taking shape. The American Republic was supposed to be immune to the kind of royal scandals that had plagued European monarchies for centuries. Yet, even in this new world of democratic ideals, the Founding Fathers would discover that love affairs and sexual scandals could be just as politically explosive as any royal romance. The early years of American democracy would be rocked by scandals involving the very men who created the nation. While Ottoman women were wielding secret power behind palace veils, an ocean away, a revolutionary new nation was being born, with a promise that it would be different from the corrupt European monarchies plagued by royal scandals. The United States of America was supposed to be a republic of virtue, led by citizen statesmen who put public service above personal desire. But what actually happened was far more human and far more scandalous than the founders ever imagined. The very men who wrote "All men are created equal" were about to prove that American democracy could produce sex scandals just as explosive as any royal romance. Here is what will absolutely blow your mind. The first major political sex scandal in American history involved the man on the $10 bill, and it was so damaging it basically ended his political career. Alexander Hamilton's affair did not just threaten his marriage. It nearly destroyed the financial system he had spent years building. But even more shocking is how Thomas Jefferson, the author of the Declaration of Independence, was simultaneously conducting a relationship that challenged everything America claimed to believe about freedom and equality. Picture Philadelphia in the 1790s, the bustling capital of a young nation that is barely holding itself together. The United States has won independence, but nobody is quite sure this whole democracy experiment is going to work. The economy is a mess. Foreign powers are circling like vultures, and the Founding Fathers are already splitting into bitter political factions. At the center of this chaos stands Alexander Hamilton, probably the most brilliant financial mind in American history. Hamilton is creating America's economic system from scratch, establishing a national bank, managing the federal debt, building the infrastructure of modern capitalism. He is working 16-hour days, writing reports that are basically inventing American finance as he goes. But Hamilton has a secret that could destroy everything he has built. In 1791, while he is serving as Secretary of the Treasury, he begins an affair with a woman named Maria Reynolds. And this is not just any affair. It is a relationship that will eventually become the first major political sex scandal in American history. Maria Reynolds is married to James Reynolds, a small-time con artist who is deeply in debt. When Maria shows up at Hamilton's door, claiming her husband has abandoned her and she needs money to return to her family, Hamilton is immediately smitten. She is young, beautiful, and in distress. Exactly the kind of damsel in distress scenario that appeals to Hamilton's romantic nature. What happens next is almost unbelievable. Hamilton starts an affair with Maria while secretly giving her money to help with her supposed financial troubles. But here is the twist that makes this story absolutely wild. James Reynolds has not actually abandoned his wife. He is orchestrating the entire scheme to blackmail the Secretary of the Treasury. Think about the sheer audacity of this con game. Reynolds is essentially pimping out his own wife to blackmail one of the most powerful men in America. And Hamilton, despite being one of the smartest people in the country, falls for it completely. For over a year, Hamilton continues the affair, while James Reynolds systematically bleeds him for money. Reynolds demands $1,000 initially, that is about $30,000 in today's money. Then he keeps coming back for more, claiming he needs money for various emergencies. Hamilton pays every time because he is terrified of the scandal becoming public. But the scheme falls apart in 1792 when James Reynolds gets arrested for trying to defraud the government in an unrelated scam. Facing prison time, Reynolds decides to take Hamilton down with him. He starts spreading rumors that Hamilton has been using his position as Treasury Secretary for personal financial gain. When congressional investigators start looking into Hamilton's finances, they discover the payments to Reynolds. But here is where Hamilton makes a decision that is either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Instead of letting people think he is corrupt, he confesses to the affair. In 1797, Hamilton publishes a 95-page pamphlet called Observations on Certain Documents, basically the longest public confession in American political history. He admits in excruciating detail to his affair with Maria Reynolds and his payments to her husband. He is essentially destroying his own reputation to preserve his professional integrity. The pamphlet is so explicit and humiliating that it shocks even Hamilton's enemies. John Adams calls it the confession of a fool. Thomas Jefferson is reportedly amazed that Hamilton would publish such damaging information about himself. Hamilton has basically committed political suicide to prove he was not financially corrupt. But while Hamilton's affair is playing out in very public newspapers, an even more complex and morally troubling relationship is developing in private at Monticello. Thomas Jefferson, the man who wrote that all men are created equal, is beginning a relationship with Sally Hemings, an enslaved woman who is legally his property. Sally Hemings is the half-sister of Jefferson's deceased wife, Martha. Both women are daughters of John Wales, though Sally's mother was an enslaved woman. This means Jefferson is essentially having a relationship with his dead wife's half-sister, who also happens to be enslaved, and has no legal right to refuse his advances. The relationship begins around 1787, when Jefferson is serving as ambassador to France, and Sally then, about 14 years old, joins his household as a servant to his daughter. In France, slavery is illegal, which means Sally is technically free and could choose not to return to Virginia. But she does return, and historical evidence suggests she is pregnant with Jefferson's child. What makes the Jefferson-Hemmings relationship so complex is the complete power imbalance involved. Sally cannot legally say no to Jefferson's advances. She cannot leave Monticello without his permission. She cannot even legally own property or enter into contracts. Yet, historical evidence suggests their relationship lasted nearly 4 decades and produced several children. DNA evidence from the 1990s confirms that Jefferson fathered at least one of Sally Hemings' children, and possibly all 6. But what is remarkable is how successfully Jefferson kept this relationship secret during his lifetime. Unlike Hamilton, who confessed his affair publicly, Jefferson never acknowledged his relationship with Sally, and most white Americans had no idea it was happening. The political implications of these scandals are enormous. Hamilton's affair essentially ends his chances of ever becoming president. Despite being one of the most important founders, his political career never recovers from the Maria Reynolds scandal. He remains influential behind the scenes, but he is no longer seen as presidential material. Jefferson's secret relationship, meanwhile, reveals the massive contradictions at the heart of American democracy. Here is a man who writes about natural rights and human equality while simultaneously owning other human beings and having children with a woman who cannot legally consent to their relationship. But here is what is fascinating about how these scandals play out. They help establish the template for American political sex scandals that we still see today. Hamilton's strategy of getting ahead of the story by confessing publicly becomes a standard approach. Jefferson's strategy of maintaining complete secrecy and never acknowledging uncomfortable truths also becomes a model. The partisan newspaper wars of the 1790s also established precedents for how political opponents use sexual scandals as weapons. Federalist newspapers attacked Jefferson's alleged relationship with Sally Hemings. Republican newspapers mock Hamilton's affair with Maria Reynolds. The founders discover that in a democracy, private behavior inevitably becomes public political ammunition. What is particularly interesting is how these scandals reveal the class and racial dynamics of early America. Hamilton's affair with a white woman becomes a major public scandal that destroys his political career. Jefferson's relationship with an enslaved black woman remains largely hidden and does not seriously damage his political standing during his lifetime. This difference shows how scandal and power intersect with race and class in American society. Relationships that cross certain social boundaries are treated as more politically dangerous than others, regardless of the actual ethical issues involved. The Founding Fathers' romantic troubles also reveal how difficult it is to separate private behavior from public responsibility in a democratic system. Should Hamilton's affair matter if he is doing a good job managing the economy? Should Jefferson's relationship with Sally Hemings affect how we judge his political philosophy? These questions do not have easy answers, but they establish patterns of American political scandal that continue today. We are still debating how much private behavior should matter in public life, how much voters should care about politicians' personal relationships, and whether past actions should disqualify people from future leadership. What do you think? Should private scandals disqualify someone from public office, or should we judge leaders purely on their professional performance? The Founding Fathers faced these same questions, and their answers helped shape American political culture. The early American Republic proves that even the most idealistic political systems cannot escape the complexities of human nature. Love, desire, power, and scandal are universal human experiences that transcend any particular form of government. But as we have seen throughout our journey tonight, royal and political love affairs do not just create personal drama. They often reveal deeper truths about the societies that produce them. The way different cultures handle romantic scandal tells us as much about their values and power structures as their official laws and institutions. In our final exploration, we will bring this story full circle to the present day, where royal romance continues to captivate global audiences and challenge ancient institutions. The modern British royal family's struggles with love, duty, and public expectation carry echoes of every story we have encountered tonight, proving that some human conflicts are truly timeless. The American Founding Fathers thought they had created a system immune to the royal scandals that plagued European monarchies. But as we have seen, human nature does not respect political systems. Yet nowhere is this more evident than in what happened next. How even the most carefully constructed modern monarchy, one that had supposedly learned from centuries of romantic disasters, would find itself facing its greatest existential crisis, not from war or revolution, but from love itself. This is the story of how Princess Diana's fairy tale became a nightmare that nearly destroyed the British monarchy, and how the institution that survived Henry VIII, Edward VIII, and 2 world wars almost crumbled because of a broken marriage. What if I told you that the most watched event in television history was not a moon landing or a Super Bowl, but a wedding that was doomed from the very beginning? That 750 million people tuned in to watch what insiders already knew was essentially a performance designed to save a monarchy in crisis. Welcome to the modern royal romance that became the most expensive public relations disaster in British history. Step into London, July 29, 1981. The world is captivated by what seems like the ultimate fairy tale. Prince Charles, heir to the British throne, is marrying Lady Diana Spencer, a 20-year-old kindergarten teacher who seems to embody everything the monarchy needs to modernize and reconnect with ordinary people. But behind the pageantry and global celebration, a tragedy is already unfolding. Charles is still in love with Camilla Parker Bowles, a woman he cannot marry because she is divorced. Diana is a teenager who barely knows her future husband and has no idea what she is signing up for. The royal family is essentially arranging a medieval political marriage in the full glare of modern media attention. Here is what makes the Charles and Diana story so devastating. Everyone involved knows it is wrong, but the institution's needs override individual happiness. The monarchy in 1981 is facing a relevance crisis. Queen Elizabeth II is seen as remote and outdated. Charles is viewed as an eccentric intellectual more interested in architecture than people. The royal family desperately needs someone young, beautiful, and relatable to restore their popular appeal. Diana Spencer fits the requirements perfectly. She is aristocratic enough to be suitable, but relatable enough to seem accessible. She is photogenic, charming with children, and completely untainted by scandal. Most importantly, she is young enough to be molded into whatever the institution needs her to become. But what the royal family does not understand is that Diana is not just a pretty face who will smile and wave on command. She is intelligent, emotionally complex, and desperately hungry for the love and attention she never received as a child. She is also entering a marriage where her husband is still psychologically attached to another woman. The warning signs appear almost immediately during their engagement interview. When asked if they are in love, Charles famously responds, "Whatever in love means." Diana looks crushed. Here is a man publicly questioning the concept of love just months before his wedding. It is like watching a car crash in slow motion. But the royal machine is already in motion. The wedding has been planned, the invitations sent, the global media circus arranged. Backing out now would be a disaster for the monarchy's credibility. So they push forward with a ceremony that is essentially a beautiful lie broadcast to 750 million people. The early years of the marriage are a masterclass in how institutional pressure can destroy personal relationships. Diana is expected to be the perfect royal wife, beautiful, supportive, and silent. But she is also dealing with bulimia, depression, and the growing realization that her husband does not love her and probably never will. Charles, meanwhile, is trapped between his duty to the institution and his genuine feelings. He tries to be a good husband, but he is emotionally unavailable in ways that drive Diana to desperation. Their marriage becomes a cycle of arguments, reconciliations, and growing mutual resentment. The real crisis begins when Diana stops playing by the royal rules. Instead of suffering in silence like royal wives are supposed to do, she starts reaching out to the media. She develops relationships with journalists who help her tell her side of the story. She uses her charisma and genuine compassion to build a public profile that is independent of the royal family. What Diana discovers is that she has something the royal family desperately needs: the ability to connect with ordinary people in ways that feel authentic and emotionally real. When she hugs AIDS patients at a time when people are afraid to shake their hands, when she walks through minefields to publicize the campaign against landmines, when she holds dying children with genuine tenderness, she is creating a new template for what royalty can be. But this success makes her increasingly dangerous to the traditional monarchy. Diana is proving that you do not need centuries of tradition and elaborate protocols to be effective as a royal figure. You just need to be genuinely compassionate and willing to break down the barriers between the monarchy and the people. The situation explodes in the 1990s when both Charles and Diana start talking publicly about their marriage. Charles admits his affair with Camilla in a 1994 television interview. Diana responds with her own bombshell interview in 1995, where she says, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." That interview is watched by 23 million people in Britain alone, nearly half the population. Diana does not just criticize Charles. She essentially declares war on the entire royal system. She questions whether Charles is fit to be king, whether the monarchy understands the modern world, and whether the institution can survive without fundamental reform. The royal family's response reveals just how threatened they feel. They essentially declare war on Diana, using their media contacts to portray her as unstable, manipulative, and dangerous to the monarchy's survival. It is a vicious campaign that damages both sides, but particularly devastates Diana, who never fully understands how ruthless the royal system can be when defending itself. The divorce in 1996 is supposed to end the crisis, but it actually makes things worse. Diana keeps her title as Princess of Wales, but loses her Royal Highness status. She is essentially cast out of the royal family, while remaining one of the most famous women in the world. She becomes a loose cannon with global celebrity and a grudge against the institution that rejected her. Then comes August 31st, 1997. Diana dies in a car crash in Paris while being pursued by paparazzi. The circumstances are tragic enough, but the public reaction is unprecedented. Millions of people pour into London to mourn a woman they feel represented something the royal family had lost: the ability to show genuine emotion and human connection. The royal family's initial response nearly destroys them. They retreat to Balmoral Castle in Scotland and say nothing publicly about Diana's death for days. No flags fly at half-mast. No official statements of grief. Queen Elizabeth II seems more concerned with protecting her grandsons than acknowledging the public's need for leadership during a moment of national mourning. For the first time in modern history, the British public turns genuinely angry at the royal family. Newspaper headlines demand, "Show us you care." Crowds outside Buckingham Palace boo mentions of the royal family. There are serious discussions about whether the monarchy can survive this crisis of legitimacy. The Queen's eventual broadcast to the nation, where she acknowledges Diana as an exceptional and gifted human being, probably saves the monarchy. But the damage is profound and lasting. The royal family has been forced to confront the fact that their traditional approach to public emotion and personal relationships is completely out of step with modern expectations. Diana's death also reveals the impossible position that modern royalty occupies. They are expected to be both ordinary and extraordinary, relatable and majestic, emotionally available, and institutionally disciplined. Diana excelled at the human side of this equation, but struggled with the institutional demands. The traditional royals understood the institutional requirements, but could not connect emotionally with the public. The aftermath of Diana's death forces the royal family to completely reinvent how they approach public life. They become more accessible, more emotionally open, more willing to acknowledge personal struggles. William and Harry grow up with a very different understanding of what royal duty means than their father did. But Diana's legacy creates new problems for the monarchy. Every royal spouse is now compared to her. Every royal crisis is measured against the standard she set for emotional authenticity. The institution that once prized stability and predictability above all else now has to navigate the much more complex territory of genuine human emotion. The Diana story also shows how modern media transforms royal romance from private drama into global spectacle. Her wedding, her marriage troubles, her divorce, and her death all play out in real time before worldwide audiences. The royal family learns that in the age of 24-hour news cycles and social media, there is no such thing as private royal behavior. What is your take on Diana's impact? Do you think she modernized and improved the royal family? Or did she damage an institution that was better when it maintained more distance from the public? It is a question that still divides people today. Diana's story proves that even the most ancient and traditional institutions have to adapt to changing social expectations about authenticity, emotion, and human connection. The monarchy that emerged from the Diana crisis was fundamentally different from the one that existed before her. But Diana's revolution was just the beginning of the monarchy's modern transformation. The institution that barely survived the Diana crisis would soon face an even more complex challenge, one that would force them to confront not just questions about love and duty, but fundamental issues about race, identity, and what it means to be British in the 21st century. The arrival of Meghan Markle would create controversies that make Diana's battles with the palace look like gentle disagreements. If the royal family thought they had learned to navigate modern romance after the Diana crisis, they were about to discover that the 21st century had entirely new challenges in store. When Prince Harry fell in love with Meghan Markle, it was not just another royal romance. It was a collision between an ancient institution and modern conversations about race, identity, and social justice that would create the monarchy's biggest existential crisis since the abdication of Edward VIII. This is the story of how love once again threatened to topple a kingdom. But this time, the battle was not just about personal happiness. It was about the very soul of the British Empire's legacy. Here is what makes the Harry and Meghan story so explosive. It is not just a romance that challenged royal tradition. It is a love affair that forced Britain to confront uncomfortable truths about racism, mental health, and institutional change that the country was not ready to face. When Meghan Markle married into the royal family, she did not just bring Hollywood glamour to Buckingham Palace. She brought questions about diversity and inclusion that threaten the very foundations of how the monarchy understands itself. Rewind to 2016 when Prince Harry meets Meghan Markle on a blind date arranged by a mutual friend. Harry is 32, a military veteran who spent years struggling to find his place in the royal system after serving 2 tours in Afghanistan. He is the spare heir who has watched his brother William prepare for kingship while he is expected to play a supporting role for the rest of his life. Meghan is a 35-year-old American actress who has built a successful career on the TV show Suits. But more importantly, she is biracial, divorced, and has spent years using her platform to advocate for women's rights and social justice causes. She represents everything the royal family has traditionally avoided. She is outspoken, politically engaged, and comes from a very different world than the aristocratic circles where royals usually find their spouses. Their early relationship seems like a genuine love story. Harry is captivated by Meghan's intelligence, her passion for humanitarian causes, and her ability to be completely natural and unimpressed by his royal status. For Meghan, Harry represents not just romantic love, but the possibility of using royal influence to amplify the causes she cares about. But from the very beginning, there are warning signs that this relationship will be different from previous royal romances. The British tabloid press immediately focuses on Meghan's race, her family background, and her previous marriage in ways that feel uncomfortably reminiscent of how they covered Diana, but with added layers of racial and cultural prejudice. headlines appear describing Meghan as Harry's exotic girlfriend and straight out of Compton, even though she actually grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Los Angeles. The coverage has undertones that feel racially charged in ways that would be unthinkable if she were a white American actress. Harry recognizes the danger immediately. In an unprecedented move for a royal, he releases a public statement in November 2016, condemning the racial undertones in media coverage of Meghan. It is the first time a member of the royal family has explicitly called out racism in the press, and it signals that this relationship will challenge the monarchy's traditional approach to media management. When their engagement is announced in November 2017, it seems like a moment of genuine progress for the royal family. Here is an institution that once ruled over a global empire, finally embracing a woman who represents the diversity of the modern Commonwealth. The engagement interview is charming. The couple seems genuinely in love, and there is hope that Meghan might bring the kind of modernizing influence that the monarchy needs. The wedding in May 2018 becomes a celebration of multiculturalism that feels revolutionary for the royal family. An African-American bishop delivers a passionate sermon about love. A gospel choir sings "Stand By Me." Meghan's mother, Doria Ragland, sits alone with dignity on the bride's side, while the groom's side is filled with European royalty. It is a visual representation of how the monarchy might evolve to reflect the diversity of modern Britain. For a moment, it seems like the royal family has successfully managed the transition to a more inclusive future. Meghan's popularity is sky high, particularly among younger and more diverse audiences. She and Harry embark on a successful tour of Australia and New Zealand, where Meghan's natural warmth and communication skills remind people of Diana at her best. But behind the scenes, cracks are already appearing. Meghan is discovering that the royal system is far more restrictive and controlling than she anticipated. Simple things like closing her own car door or wearing certain colors become subjects of intense scrutiny and criticism. Her Hollywood background, which initially seemed like an asset, becomes a liability as she is criticized for being too American and too comfortable in the spotlight. More seriously, Meghan starts experiencing what she later describes as suicidal thoughts. The combination of intense media scrutiny, social media harassment, and the isolation of royal life proves overwhelming. When she reaches out for help from the royal institution, she is told that getting mental health treatment would be bad for the family's image. This is where the Harry and Meghan story becomes a devastating indictment of how the royal family has failed to learn from the Diana tragedy. Here is another young woman struggling with mental health issues in the royal system, and the institution's response is essentially the same. Protect the image. Ignore the human cost. Harry, who has spent his entire adult life dealing with his own mental health struggles related to his mother's death, watches his wife suffering in ways that are painfully familiar. But unlike his father's generation, Harry refuses to prioritize institutional needs over personal well-being. The situation reaches crisis point in early 2020 when Harry and Meghan announce they want to step back from their roles as senior royals. They propose a half-in, half-out arrangement where they will continue some royal duties while also pursuing financial independence and living part-time outside Britain. The royal family's response is swift and brutal. Queen Elizabeth II essentially gives them an ultimatum. You are either fully in or fully out. There is no middle ground. Harry and Meghan choose to leave entirely, giving up their royal titles, their official roles, and their financial support from the family. But the real explosion comes in March 2021, with their interview with Oprah Winfrey, watched by over 17 million people in the US and 11 million in the UK. It is the most damaging royal interview since Diana's 1995 bombshell. Meghan's revelations are devastating. She describes feeling suicidal and being denied help. She reveals that members of the royal family expressed concerns about how dark their unborn son's skin might be. She portrays the institution as cold, racist, and completely unwilling to protect her from harassment and abuse. Harry's contributions to the interview are equally damaging. He describes feeling trapped by the royal system, cut off financially by his family, and abandoned by his father, Prince Charles. He draws explicit parallels between Meghan's treatment and his mother's experiences, suggesting that the royal family has learned nothing from Diana's death. The interview's impact is seismic. In America, it is seen as confirmation that the British royal family is a racist institution that drove out a woman of color who was trying to modernize it. In Britain, reactions are more divided, but polling shows significant damage to the royal family's reputation, particularly among younger people. The controversy raises fundamental questions about the monarchy's future. Can an institution that was literally built on empire and colonialism ever truly embrace diversity and inclusion? Is it possible to reform a system that depends on hereditary privilege and social hierarchy? Or are the contradictions too fundamental to resolve? What makes the Harry and Meghan story so compelling is how it brings together every theme we have explored in our journey through royal love affairs. Like Edward VIII, Harry chooses love over duty, but his decision is framed in terms of mental health and racial justice rather than simple romance. Like Diana, Meghan uses media interviews to challenge the royal family's narrative, but she is operating in an era of social media where her message can reach global audiences instantly. The story also reveals how much society has changed since previous royal crises. Issues that might have been ignored or covered up in earlier eras. Racism, mental health, institutional accountability are now central to public discourse. The royal family is being held to standards of transparency and inclusivity that would have been unimaginable in previous centuries. Harry and Meghan's decision to leave the royal family represents something unprecedented, a successful escape from the royal system by people who are willing to sacrifice enormous privilege for personal autonomy and principles. Unlike previous royal rebels who were destroyed by their conflicts with the institution, Harry and Meghan have built independent lives and platforms that give them continuing influence. Their story also demonstrates how royal romance in the social media age operates under completely different rules than in the past. Every gesture, outfit choice, and public appearance becomes subject to instant global commentary. The 24-hour news cycle and social media harassment create pressures that no previous generation of royals had to navigate. Do you think Harry and Meghan were right to leave the royal family? Or should they have stayed and tried to reform it from within? It is a question that divides people along generational and cultural lines, and there are legitimate arguments on both sides. The Harry and Meghan controversy shows us that even in the 21st century, love affairs can still threaten ancient institutions. But the nature of those threats has evolved. It is no longer just about personal scandal or dynastic succession. Modern royal romance has become a battleground for larger questions about justice, equality, and institutional change. As we reach the end of our journey through love affairs that nearly destroyed kingdoms, Harry and Meghan's story brings us full circle to where we began with questions about whether love and institutional duty can ever truly coexist, and what happens when they cannot. Their tale proves that some human conflicts are indeed timeless, even as the specific contexts continue to evolve with each generation. As we reach the end of our extraordinary journey through centuries of royal romance, from ancient Egypt to modern Britain, one truth emerges with crystal clarity. Love has always been the most powerful force capable of toppling kingdoms, reshaping empires, and rewriting the course of human history. But perhaps the most remarkable lesson from these tales is not about the destructive power of forbidden love. It is about how these intimate human dramas reveal the eternal tensions between personal happiness and public duty, between individual desire and institutional survival. Think about the incredible tapestry we have woven together tonight. We began with Edward VIII, who gave up the British Empire for an American divorcee, and discovered that his great romance might have been more complicated than the fairy tale version we have been told. We traveled back to ancient Egypt, where Cleopatra used love as the ultimate weapon of war, seducing Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, not just for passion, but for the survival of her kingdom. We witnessed Marie Antoinette's destruction by rumors and fake news that feel remarkably modern in their viciousness, proving that propaganda about royal love affairs has been toppling governments for centuries. We saw Henry VIII literally break Christianity in half because he could not get a divorce, creating a body count that would make modern dictators blush. From the mysterious death of Rasputin in frozen Russian rivers, to Elizabeth I's brilliant manipulation of marriage negotiations, from Napoleon's heartbreak reshaping European warfare to Theodora's incredible rise from courtesan to empress. Each story has shown us that when love meets absolute power, the consequences ripple through history in ways no one can predict. But here is what I find most fascinating about all these tales. They are not really about love at all. They are about power, identity, and the fundamental human struggle between who we want to be and who the world expects us to be. Every royal lover we have encountered tonight was trapped between their personal desires and the weight of history, between their individual humanity and their institutional role. Edward VIII chose love over empire, but was his choice romantic or selfish? Cleopatra used romance as statecraft, but was she brilliant or manipulative? Henry VIII claimed to be following his conscience, but was he devout or psychopathic? These questions do not have simple answers, because human nature itself is complex and contradictory. What is remarkable is how these stories span over 2,000 years of human history, yet the fundamental conflicts remain exactly the same. Whether we are talking about a Roman empress in ancient Egypt or a Hollywood actress in modern Britain, the tensions between love and duty, between personal fulfillment and public responsibility, between individual choice and institutional expectation never really change. The media landscape has evolved dramatically, from whispered court gossip to pamphlets to newspapers to social media. But the underlying dynamics remain constant. Powerful people fall in love with inappropriate partners. Institutions try to control personal behavior for political reasons. The public becomes fascinated by the private lives of their leaders. And sometimes, very rarely, love actually wins. Perhaps the most profound lesson from our journey is how these royal romances serve as mirrors for their societies. The way each culture handled scandal, love, and institutional crisis tells us as much about their values and fears as their official histories do. The Byzantines rewarded Theodora's transformation, showing a society that valued merit over birth. The Tudors were terrified of religious division, making Henry's marital chaos a theological crisis. The modern British struggle with Meghan and Harry reveals deep tensions about race, tradition, and institutional change that Britain is still working to resolve. These stories also remind us that the people we consider historical giants were fundamentally just human beings dealing with the same emotions and conflicts we all face. They fell in love with the wrong people, made terrible decisions because of jealousy or heartbreak, chose passion over practicality, and paid prices for their choices that echo through centuries. But perhaps most importantly, these tales of royal romance show us that change is possible, even in the most rigid and traditional institutions. Theodora proved that someone from the absolute bottom of society could reach the very top. Elizabeth I demonstrated that a woman could rule alone in a world designed by and for men. The modern royals who have survived scandals have done so by adapting, evolving, and finding ways to honor both tradition and human dignity. As we think about these stories in our own time, when institutions everywhere are being challenged to become more inclusive, transparent, and responsive to human needs, the lessons from royal romance feel remarkably relevant. The tension between institutional stability and personal authenticity is not just a royal problem. It is something every organization, every family, and every individual grapples with. What can we learn from centuries of royal romantic disasters? Maybe that love is too powerful a force to be managed by laws and traditions alone. Maybe that institutions that refuse to adapt to human nature eventually face existential crises. Maybe that the cost of choosing duty over happiness, or happiness over duty, is almost always higher than anyone anticipates. But perhaps the most hopeful message from our journey is that love does sometimes triumph, not by destroying institutions, but by transforming them. The royal families that have survived and thrived are those that found ways to honor both human emotion and public responsibility, that adapted their traditions to accommodate the full spectrum of human experience. I am curious about your thoughts as we conclude this marathon exploration. Which of tonight's stories surprised you the most? Do you think modern society has gotten better at balancing personal happiness with public duty? Or are we still struggling with the same fundamental conflicts that destroyed ancient kingdoms? And here is a question that might keep you thinking long after tonight. If you had absolute power, would you choose love or duty when they came into conflict? It is easy to judge these historical figures from the comfort of our modern lives, but their dilemmas were real. Their stakes were enormous, and their choices shaped the world we live in today. As we drift off to sleep tonight, Let these stories remind us that every great historical moment was shaped by individual human beings making deeply personal choices about love, loyalty, and identity. The kingdoms may rise and fall, the empires may crumble to dust, but the human heart remains constant across centuries, passionate, stubborn, sometimes wise, often foolish, and always capable of changing the world in ways no one sees coming. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey through love affairs that nearly destroyed kingdoms. Your attention and curiosity have made these ancient stories feel alive and relevant again. The tales we have shared tonight prove that history is not just about dates and battles. It is about real people facing impossible choices, falling in love at the worst possible moments, and discovering that sometimes the most personal decisions have the most profound historical consequences. Sweet dreams. And remember, tomorrow night we will explore an entirely new chapter of history's most fascinating secrets. Until then, let these stories of love, power, and human nature carry you into peaceful sleep, knowing that the greatest adventures are often found not in distant lands, but in the eternal complexities of the human heart.